Chapter 1076. Since Mi Fengjie had just entered the Finger Xian realm, he started to show signs of blossoming. Most martial artists in the world were like this. The higher one entered the Finger Xian realm, the more they cherished their cultivation. After all, not everyone was like Li Chungang, a rare genius who could make a breakthrough in a few years. However, the person in front of him was too young, so Mi Fengjie did not see him as a mortal enemy. He only wanted to demonstrate his strength with his sword and force the person to retreat before continuing on his way. Mi Fengjie did not draw his sword. He merely exhaled lightly. Previously, he had gifted the youth an ancient sword on Mount Fuyao. There were a total of 35 ancient swords. Among them, there was a sheathless sword that was hidden among the swords. It was as thin as a young girl's little finger. It swept towards the young Northern Liang official who was babbling nonsense. After Mi Fengjie controlled the flying sword, he squinted his eyes to admire the green and slender blade. Because it was too fast, it looked like a young bamboo leaf that was twisting in a subtle arc. The tip of the sword also had strands of scarlet sword qi that seeped out, just like a green snake spitting out its red tongue. Su Fengyan seemed to casually extend his hand. His thumb and index finger pinched the green bamboo leaf and crushed the sword energy in an instant. After the thin sword was restrained by his finger, Mi Fengjie decisively cut off the connection. However, the remaining energy of the flying sword still caused the tail of the ancient sword, named Green Leaf, to vibrate violently. Mi Fengjie did not dare to be careless anymore. He opened his arms and was about to unsheathe the 6 ancient swords to kill when the young man laughed softly and said, "My name is Su Fengyan. Do you really want to fight?" Mi Fengjie's expression changed drastically. He forcefully swallowed a mouthful of majestic qi and the 6 swords returned to their sheaths in the blink of an eye. Mi Fengjie was a little surprised. When the young man announced his identity, he did not suspect anything. He was just curious as to why a vassal king would come to Mount Fuyao. "You are the 6th in the world. Are you going to make things difficult for me, a Finger Xian swordsman? Are you going to put aside your military affairs and come to the deep mountains for this reason?" Mi Fengjie smiled and said, "The king of Beiliang is so free and elegant that he wants to lower himself to the same level as a few bandits." Su Fengyan threw away the precious ancient sword with its sword embryo destroyed. Ignoring the hidden sarcasm in the words of the master of the profound sword cave, he asked, "Song Nianqing of the Dongyue sword pool used 14 sword moves before he died. Do you want to learn them? If you want to learn, you can stay in Beiliang and serve this king. Tide Listening Pavilion has secret manuals from the 6th floor down for you to read." Mi Fengjie's face was gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking, so he didn't say anything. Su Fengyan smiled and said, "When you reach Celestial Phenomenon, you can leave Beiliang at any time. This king can promise you that even if there is a battle to the death, this king won't put you in danger, much less send you to the border to fight. It's just that there are some people you need to protect in secret. Beiliang still lacks some top-notch experts to oversee the prefectures." Mi Fengjie sneered and said, "Is there such a good thing in the world?" Su Fengyan hooked his finger and the thin sword that had destroyed the sword embryo and the divine will of the sword returned to his hand. His finger slowly brushed across the body of the sword and an image of flowing lights and vibrant colors appeared. The new sword embryo was close to perfection. Such a mysterious move was no different from the Buddhists becoming Buddha on the spot. Su Fengyan held the new sword in his hand, pointed it at Mi Fengjie, and took a step forward. There was no shocking aura, nor were there any complicated sword moves that were beyond words. Even Su Fengyan's previous stance and the step he took were very casual. There was no air of an expert at all. He was like an old man looking at the sunset and taking a step forward to catch up. However, Mi Fengjie still retreated a few dozen feet, his face pale. This sword had just started. But Mi Fengjie found that he couldn't break through all 36 sword moves. He had no choice but to surrender before the battle. Su Fengyan threw the ancient sword back to Mi Fengjie and said calmly, "This is the beginning of Song Nianqing's Earth Immortal Sword before his death. Do you believe me now? Of course, this king has only learned about 50 to 60% of the spirit qi." Mi Fengjie gritted his teeth and was about to kneel down. Su Fengyan waved his hand and laughed. Forget it. You have to know that 4 to 5 years ago, a top expert like you, Mi Fengjie, would be worshipped by this king. Back to the immortal coffin cave and pass down this king's order. Tell Huang Fujin to show mercy. As long as you want them to live, they can live. They can choose whether they want to join the army at the border or become the personal guards of the generals in the border. As for the wealth that the immortal coffin cave has accumulated over the years, just treat it as the salary for the troops sent from Yuzhou to Mount Fuyao. After Mi Fengjie left, Su Fengyan carried a tree branch back to the smoke-filled Mount Fuyao and sat at the entrance. Wei Jin went down the mountain to report the battle situation to the mountain chieftain, whose real name was Zhang Gonglian. This place was already in a precarious situation from the front and rear. More than 100 strong youths fought and retreated to the foot of the mountain. Lu Haya, who was fighting for Mount Fuyao, had already left midway and hurried to the immortal coffin cave. Zhang Juxian suffered some minor injuries, while Lu Yu, the Wei and Jin dynasty's disciple, was severely injured. In the midst of the fierce battle, Commandant Su Jin seized the opportunity to take advantage of the situation. Not only did he slice off half of Lu Yu's shoulder, he also gave Su Jin an arrow that pierced through his other shoulder. If Lu Yu had not relied on his intuition to turn sideways, he would have been pierced through the heart by the arrow. Originally, with Zhang Juxian and Nan Baoyu as the stabilizing force, even if Mount Fuyao was at an absolute disadvantage in terms of numbers, they could still repel Su Jin's 100 armored soldiers. However, Fan Shaochai and Wang Shiwei had suddenly joined the battle. Their unreasonable interference had caused the Twin Hammer's fierce man, Nan Baoyu, to lose his life. Nan Baoyu had swung his sparrow-tail saber at the young woman, and the 200 Jin man had been lifted into the air by the arc saber. The rusted copper sword that Fan Shaochai had just obtained had also stabbed Nan Baoyu in the chest over a dozen times. His heart had been minced into pieces, and a ghastly hole the size of a bowl could be seen on his body. The she-devil pulled out her saber and dropped the corpse. When she dragged the saber towards Zhang Juxian, the tip of the saber drew a bloody groove on Nan Baoyu's body. From his abdomen to his forehead, a bright red line appeared. After she joined the battle, Zhang Juxian was entangled. It was at that time that Lu Yu was ambushed by Commandant Su Jin. This group of soldiers relied on their well-coordinated elite infantry to advance steadily. Their weapons and crossbows and their coordination in formation were far superior to the grassland bandits of Mount Fuyao who only knew how to fight with brute force. Moreover, the 100 armored soldiers were followed by the patrolmen who picked up the slack. Although these people did not have the ability to fight to the death, they had the ability to take advantage of the situation to pursue and attack. Moreover, they had stepped over the corpses of more than 90 of their comrades, which had truly aroused their bloodlust. As a result, Mount Fuyao's army was naturally defeated. If it were not for Wei Jin and his men helping to bring up the rear, let alone 100 of them, not even 10 of them would have been able to retreat back to the foot of the mountain. These grassland bandits, who were more or less injured, were chased down and killed like drowning dogs on their own territory. They all had lingering fears. In the past, they had often come into contact with the government's patrolmen. As time passed, they also began to look down on the Bailiang army. They always felt that the two sides were jackals of the same lair. How strong could the Bailiang soldiers be? Normally, they would curse Bailiang together with the immortal master Wei Jin. They always liked to say that the Bailiang cavalry was the best in the world. If they were really powerful, why didn't the Su family's 300,000 iron cavalry, which consisted of 120,000 cavalry and over 200,000 infantry, which were collectively known as the Su family's iron cavalry, trample Beimang flat? In the end, when they actually encountered Commandant Su Jin's troops, they finally realized that the real Bailiang army, which was clad in armor and equipped with cold sabers, was simply like the difference between heaven and earth when compared to those patrolmen who were wearing a layer of official skin. Chapter 1077. Su Fengyan sat under the archway of the mountain gate, watching the half-dead young men of Mount Fuyao climb up the mountain at top speed. After thinking for a while, he decided not to reveal his identity in front of these bandits, so he returned to his courtyard. After that, it was still a battle of offense and defense. The people of Mount Fui who had nowhere to retreat, especially after they heard the commandant's order not to take captives, began to bite like rabbits without regard for their own lives. Relying on the geographical advantage and the weapon storage on the mountain, they managed to drag on for more than 2 hours after noon. Most of the time, the soldiers and the bandits exchanged bows and arrows. There was no shortage of arrows. Wei and Jean knew that Mount Fui was quenching their thirst by drinking doves to quench their thirst. In terms of proficiency with bows and arrows, the bandits on the mountain were no match for the soldiers, especially the elite soldiers of the Fifth Army in Yuzhou. However, if they did not use arrows to block the path, Mount Fui could gain the upper hand in the early stages of the battle. Even so, it was not worth it even if they were heavily injured in exchange for the lives of the soldiers. After all, the enemy still had more than 400 people. Some women, children, servants, and odd-job workers who could not escape in time at the edge of the mountain resisted with all their might. Some even pretended to surrender and waited for an opportunity to stab their daggers into the enemy's abdomen. They did not hesitate to die together with the enemy. This unexpected situation made the soldiers who were ordered not to kill them all feel too lazy to speak nonsense about not killing those who surrendered. After several of his bodyguards died in battle, an extremely angry deputy commandant would bring an extra weapon with him every time he led a team into the courtyard. He would throw the weapon to the bandits when he saw them, regardless of whether they would resist or not. He would then raise his arm with a sinister smile and kill everyone he saw. Commandant Su Jin did not seem to be in a hurry to end the battle. He had someone set up a table in an open area and piled a few jugs of wine on the table. He began to drink by himself. There were not many people who were qualified to sit down. Wang Shiwei, the head of the patrol officers of Qingan County, was definitely one of them. However, he did not sit down. Instead, he stood to the side and watched the battle, discussing with the old patrol officers around him how to attack. The blood-covered county commandant Bai Shank first approached and exchanged a few pleasantries. Later, when he heard that the battle in one of the courtyards was in a stalemate, he did not hesitate to leave with a dozen or so patrol officers. Wang Shiwei did not see the demoness surnamed Fan. He guessed that she had gone to save Brother Su. Thus, he resisted the urge to look for the registrar. Song Yu, who had killed many enemies in this battle, sat down without restraint. Su Jin nodded and smiled at the young man. When the county commandant Feng Guan sat down, he glanced at the commandant. The county commandant Su. The county commandant. The county commandant Feng Saturday. Sat. Su Jin saw that the local civil official had some discernment. The commandant, who had crossed his legs, reached out and pushed a jug of wine. Only then did Feng Guan dare to sit down. He picked up the jug and poured himself a cup of wine. He took a big gulp. After suppressing his shock, he leaned back in his chair and felt his entire body relax. Bishan County had made a great contribution this time. It was only natural that Commandant Yu, who sat across from him, took the lead. Feng Guan did not dare to fight for anything. The patrol officers of the two counties had also put in a lot of effort. But then again, Bishan County had not been idle this time. He, Feng Guan, was the county commandant. He had not hesitated to take the risk and personally entered the mountain. Thus, it was only a matter of time before he went to Yanji County and gained real power. Feng Guan raised his cup to Commandant Su. He then leisurely savored the aftertaste of the wine. He turned his head to look at the fighting in the distance, as well as the wails that filled his ears. He smiled and wondered if he had become a Confucian general who talked and laughed wittily with the smoke of war above his head. It would be better if this battle was fought slowly. Only then could that young registrar of Bishan, who had good fortune with women, die more cleanly, and not have the chance to become a fish that escaped the net. Bishan County had a vacant registrar of Bishan. At the same time, there was an extremely beautiful widow. Wasn't this killing two birds with one stone for him, County Commandant Feng? After another hour, a large group of soldiers wearing bright armor and carrying crossbows suddenly appeared. Wang Shiwei was stunned. How could there be crossbowmen in Mount Fuyao? The leader was a young man with a saber. He had a dignified appearance. Physiognomy books said that this kind of man who looked like a woman was mostly blessed with good fortune. Just as Wang Shiwei was puzzled, he saw the arrogant commandant Su Zhen suddenly stand up and stride forward. He respectfully cupped his fists and said in a deep voice, "Commandant Su Zhen of Dusk County greets Commander Yu." No matter how arrogant Su Zhen was, he didn't dare lower his guard in the slightest when he took a fancy to this person. Some time ago, he had seen with his own eyes how this person was able to speak freely between Provincial Governor Hu Kuei and General Huang Fuji, the two major officials of Yuzhou. He was able to be neither servile nor overbearing and respectfully accompany the last seat. At that time, Su Zhen had clicked his tongue in wonder. Afterward, when he asked the old sergeant, who was already a commandant, he found out that this young talent was the most eye-catching one among the scholars who went to Liangliang. He was the legitimate eldest grandson of the Yu family of Guangling, Yu Luandao. The old sergeant even mysteriously said that the king of Beiliang was also full of praise for this person's Liangzhou Big Horse song. Therefore, it was a fact that Yu Luandao's meteoric rise in Yuzhou was set in stone. Su Zhen was only a commandant. How could he dare to do anything in front of this young crossbowman commandant? Yu Luandao returned the salute with a warm smile. He said, "Commandant Su, you've worked hard. General Huangfu has already destroyed the immortal coffin cave and will soon arrive at this mountain. At the celebration feast, Yu Luandao will have a good drink with Commandant Su, who has achieved great merit." Seeing that this person didn't have the refined and sour air of a famous scholar, Su Zhen became more and more pleasing to the eye. He grinned. "Well said. My alcohol tolerance is passable, but my alcohol tolerance is without question. As long as Commandant Yu dares to get drunk, I will accompany him until he is drunk." Yu Luandao smiled slightly. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a person wearing the uniform of a civil official cautiously approach. Yu Luandao, who had not yet gone to the border to obtain military merit, asked with a smile, "Are you County Magistrate Feng of Bishan District?" Feng Guan was overwhelmed by the favor and hurriedly nodded. He didn't know how this young general knew his surname and official position. Yu Luandao didn't continue speaking. With a snap of his fingers, the 40 or so elite crossbowmen behind him entered the battlefield. Su Zhen didn't dare fall behind. He personally led the troops to break through the enemy lines. He was determined to take down Mount Fuyao in one go and leave a good impression on the Yuzhou general. In a courtyard, more than a dozen aggressive patrolling officers broke through the door. Seeing two female servants snuggling up to each other, hiding behind a stone table while shivering, the two leaders looked at each other and smiled knowingly. One of them pulled the hair of the other girl and pressed her against the stone table. Finding the cumbersome clothing troublesome, they tore off their clothes and undid their waistbands, revealing their bare buttocks. Hearing the girl's miserable whimpers, the two leaders of the patrolling officers laughed wildly at the same time. Spending money and drinking wine in a brothel, they couldn't play such a new trick. Just as one of the patrolmen grabbed the girl's slender neck and lifted her back, just as he was about to get on the horse with his spear, he saw a scene that spoiled the mood. The door to the inner courtyard was open, and a young man was sitting inside. There were a few chicken cages at his feet. This grassland bandit didn't run away. Instead, he asked, "Since there are military merits and rewards, do you think there will be no women after going down the mountain? If I remember correctly, Beiliang doesn't have a city slaughter order. After attacking a city, no one is allowed to disturb the people." The leader of the patrolmen felt that this kid's head had been crushed by the door. He tilted his head and signaled a few of his subordinates to remove the kid's head. His hands weren't idle as he sneered, "Disturb the people? These grassland bandits all deserve to die. I'm getting rid of evil for the people. Once the brothers are done playing, I'll stab them to death." In a daze, the leader's head was pressed down by someone, and he slammed it heavily against the stone table. His head split open and a crack appeared on the stone table. The other leader of the patrolmen, who had been about to force himself on the girl, met the same fate. The two maidservants, who had just escaped death, sat on the ground and did their best to protect their bodies. Su Fengyan sat on a stone bench and pushed aside a corpse whose head was on the stone table. Fan Shaochai stood at the door and watched this scene quietly. Su Fengyan said to her, "Go and pass on the message. Don't say that it was me who said it. Just say that it's okay to kill people, but they have to follow the rules. Fan Xiaochai left silently. Su Fengyan folded his hands into his sleeves. After some thought, he got up and went into the room to pick up 2 loose outer robes. He bent down and handed them to the 2 crying girls. Their eyes were filled with fear as they retreated. Su Fengyan smiled and threw the clothes in front of them. Don't worry. The foot of the mountain isn't a mountain of swords and a sea of flames. Although one of the women was horrified by the killing methods of this official at the foot of the mountain. Perhaps she finally remembered that she had talked and laughed with this handsome guy during this period of time. She wiped away her tears and plucked up her courage to ask, Sir Su, will we die? Su Fengyan shook his head and smiled. Of course not. Su Fengyan flashed and arrived at the peak of Mount Fui. The rays of light were beginning to show signs of descending westward. Su Fengyan sat on the ground and asked softly, Wang Xianji, are you really going to come out of the city to kill me as soon as I become a terrestrial immortal? Su Fengyan sighed and said helplessly, Can't you wait a year or so? Beimang still knows to give Beiliang a chance to catch his breath. You, on the other hand, are you in a hurry to ascend? Su Fengyan suddenly stood up with a gloomy expression. Su Fengyan only rated him as the 6th in the martial evaluation. Clearly, he wanted to delay the final battle between him and Wang Xianji to buy precious time for Su Fengyan to absorb Gao Shulu's forget worries divine marrow. However, Wang Xianji wasn't so easy to fool. Moreover, Yuan Qingshan had said that the gate of heaven might close one day. Wang Xianji, who still wanted to continue being invincible above the 9th heaven, definitely couldn't sit still. Then why did Miss Hehe leave? Su Fengyan initially thought that she wanted to see Huang Sanjia for the last time. Now, it seemed that even if he didn't guess wrong, she would definitely stupidly block the path of the east-west line after knowing that Wang Xianji had left the Eastern Sea. He only hoped that the meticulous Huang Longsher wouldn't let her do anything stupid even if he had to tie her up. If it really didn't work out, he would knock her out. Su Fengyan looked at the sky and laughed self-deprecatingly. Has my luck really run out? I really jinxed it as always. Su Fengyan restrained his smile. Since there was no need to hide it, then he would wait for Wang Xianji to come to Beiliang. Su Fengyan took a deep breath and sat on the ground again. He began to collect an item. At the peak of Mount Talisman, there was a myriad of phenomena. It truly displayed the spirit of sitting in the north and swallowing the south. This item was called Fortune of the Mountains and Rivers. Since the old destiny has come to an end, then I will swallow the destiny of thousands of miles of mountains and rivers in a way that no one has ever done before. Chapter 1078. A carriage with yellow curtains entered Martial Emperor City of the Eastern Sea. After entering the city, it attracted countless gazes. Other than the fact that the carriage itself was very eye-catching, it was also because the coachman was Qi Jiajie, an expert who had been famous in Great Peace City for a long time. He had been the #1 swordsman in the capital for more than a decade. Qi Jiajie wore white clothes, white shoes, and white scabbard. Even though he was middle-aged, his face was still like jade and his bearing was extraordinary. The scabbard of Qi Jiajie's sword was extremely long, but that Bai Shuang was actually very short, only slightly longer than a dagger. No one knew why it was clearly a short sword, but it had a long scabbard. Over the years, they had only sparred a few times, and the number of times he had used his sword could be counted on one hand. Qi Jiajie practiced the sword. He came from an unorthodox background and did not belong to a renowned sect. Then, he suddenly appeared out of nowhere, becoming one of the leading figures of the world sword forest after Li Chungang and Dong Tai. A few princes who had already become vassals, as well as Grand Secretary Zhang's daughter, Zhang Gaoxia, and some of the most outstanding children of the nobility in Liang were all his disciples. Their accomplishments were either high or low, but none of them were vulgar. How could Martial Emperor City not be curious about someone who could make Qi Jiajie personally drive? Moreover, the forces of the imperial court did not interfere in Great Peace City. This was an established rule. As a result, when this carriage suddenly entered the city, it caused great panic in Martial Emperor City. It had to be known that there were too many Jianghu people in the city with murder cases, and they were all great bandits on the wanted list. If there really was a day when Great Peace City lost that life-saving talisman, At most 1 or 2 people would die unjustly. Some of the first-rate experts who had suffered greatly under the human cat Han Diaosi were even more fearful. They were already prepared to become stray dogs again. Qi Jiajie stopped his carriage under the walls of the inner city filled with famous people's treasures. A eunuch dressed in bright red python robes lifted the curtain and walked down from the carriage. A few Jianghu men who were watching from afar did not even see his face clearly before they turned and ran in fright. They all thought of him as the demon Han Diaosi. Only great eunuchs could wear the great red python robes. This was the custom of the imperial palace of Great Peace City. In reality, this eunuch was very young Song Tonglu. However, he held the position of eunuch of the ceremony directorate. He was the next eunuch in the world after Han Shengxian. He raised his head and gazed deeply at the walls, revealing a sliver of imperceptible bitterness. Even if Song Tonglu had a carefully worded imperial edict, he did not have the confidence to reason with this person. Qi Jiajie was the first Jianghu loose immortal in the world. He could be said to be a great hermit in the imperial court. He did not need to observe anyone's words and expressions. He was far less worried than Song Tonglu. He leisurely told the eunuchs beside him about the Jianghu anecdotes that were nailed to the walls. Song Tonglu was not paying attention, but he was used to being cautious. He still listened with a pleasant expression to the story of this person who had the potential to become the teacher of the emperor of Jianghu. Soon, someone came down from the city wall to welcome the guests. Qi Jiajie's eyes lit up. It was old Monster Wang's direct disciple Lu Huang. His sword was Bodhisattva Barbarian. He gave up Taoism to seek skills. He limped forward on the path of sword practice. Therefore, he was called Little Dong Tai. The three of them walked up the steps together. There were already several people waiting on the city wall. Qi Jiajie recognized most of them based on the Jianghu rumors. The one who was riding a little girl in green on his neck should be Wang Shenji's first disciple, Yu Gongzhu. The tall, imposing, and charming beauty was already ranked in the Rouge evaluation 3 times. She was the grandmaster of boxing, Lin Ye. She was playing with the little girl on the neck of her martial brother Yu Gongzhu. However, Qi Jiajie did not see Gong Bonk, who had a ring scar on his head but wore a Taoist robe. Instead, he saw a young man with sunken cheeks and a withered face. A dilapidated ivory fan hung on his waist. He stood a little far from Yu Gongzhu, staring blankly at the eastern sea. Song Tonglu's gaze swept over the young man's face. He paused for a moment, then calmly looked at the bridegroom Yu and asked softly, "Young Master Yu, our ceremony directorate Song Tonglu, may I know where City Lord Wang is?" Yu groom, who was holding the legs of the green-clothed girl, said apologetically, "Master has left the city with Junior sect brother Gong. But he knew that Song Diao Temple was coming and told me to pass a message to Great Peace City." Song Tonglu made a sound of acknowledgement. He did not show any anger or disappointment. His gaze was calm as he said, "Young Master Yu, please speak." Yu groom smiled slightly and said, "Master said that he sent a message to Great Peace City not to ask for a promise, but to inform the Zhao family's son of heaven. This trip out of the city is his last time appearing in the world. If anyone wants to block the way." At this point, the girl in green lowered her head and whispered in the bridegroom's ear. He could only gently pat her little head and ask her to let him finish his words. When the girl stopped, the bridegroom continued, "You can try to get 10,000 cavalry to try first." Qi Jiajie frowned. At the same time, Lin Ye looked straight at this dissatisfied top swordsman of Jingdo. Song Tonglu seemed to have a naturally slow temperament. When he heard such rebellious words, he only took them seriously. He was still like a clay bodhisattva without any temper, not at all like the head of the ceremony directorate who had the power to overturn the capital. Yu groom said calmly, "It is not that I do not understand Jingdo's thoughts. That king of Beiliang should not die now. It is best if he dies after he and Beimang are both injured. But Master is not willing to wait. As disciples, we do not dare to say anything. If this is a bad thing, there is also good news for Song Zhongyin. That is, starting from the day Master left the city, the court will take over Jianghu. You can enter the city to capture and kill people. There will be no more restrictions on the Eastern Sea. After saying this, I will also leave the city with my junior sect brother and sister. I plan to explore Jianghu. Song Tonglu nodded and said gently, Young Master Jingyu, you will become famous in one move. Song Tonglu obviously did not know martial arts, but everyone present was the top grandmaster of Jianghu. Listening to his words and aura, it seemed to come from the bottom of his heart. Could be said that it was impeccable. If it was really intentional, this Martin Temple's cultivation in officialdom was simply shocking. Of course, it could not be ruled out that this person had a calm temperament. But could such a eunuch really climb to the top step by step and take over the ceremony supervisor position from Han Shengxian? Linya was still fine and continued to tease the green-clothed girl. Lu Huang could not help but look at Song Tonglu a few more times. Song Tonglu turned his head and looked back. He said with emotion, It is rare for me to leave Jingdo. It is a pity that I could not see old immortal Wang with my own eyes. Song Tonglu laughed loudly and said, Since we have left the city, I will return to Jingdo immediately. Heroes, farewell. I hope we can meet again in the future. Yu Groom and Lu Huang cupped their fists to send him off. Even Lin Ye nodded slightly. The green-clothed girl suddenly asked curiously, Hey, Mr. Song, do you have an imperial edict? Can I touch it? Mr. Song? Song Tonglu was stunned at first, but then he laughed heartily. His eyes narrowed into a line, and his expression was especially gentle. He no longer referred to himself as I. Yes, I will bring it to you now. Wait a moment. The imperial edict was in a box. Song Tonglu did not think of taking it out to announce the edict at first. Was he going to ask the people of Martial Emperor City to kneel and listen to the edict? So he simply left it in the carriage. But since the jade-like girl on Yu Groom's shoulder wanted it, Song Tonglu would give it to her. Qi Jiajie glanced at Yu Groom, who was said to be able to inherit Wang Xinji's mantle. He rubbed the white frost sword's hilt with his thumb and smiled. Mr. Yu, if you have the chance, come to Jingdo. I will definitely be a good host. Yu Groom gave a flat N. Qi Jiajie turned and walked down the city wall. Linya watched as the great eunuch ran down the city wall to get the imperial edict. She could not help but laugh. You are not annoying. Yu Groom nodded. It is indeed rare. The girl jumped down from Yu Groom's neck and excitedly ran to receive the edict. Linya asked, Senior Martial Brother Yu, Senior Martial Brother Gong originally wanted to go to Great Peace City, but he changed his mind and went to the southern border. I did not listen to Master. What about you and Junior Martial Brother Lu? What do you think? Lu Huang's eyes were determined. I am preparing to go to Beiliang and see if that Su person can really fight with Master. Yu Groom smiled. There are people staying to watch the house, there are people going to the south, and there will be people going to the west soon. It seems like I can only go to the north. Linya frowned. Great Peace City? Yu Groom shook his head. Even further north. Liao. Lu Huang looked around and said softly, I have to go first. Linya said mischievously, Hurry up and leave. Be careful not to be beaten by the world's sixth king of Beiliang. Lu Huang glanced at the unsociable young man. Just as he was about to speak, Linya glared and said, Nothing good comes out of a dog's mouth. Be good and shut up. Lu Huang laughed loudly. He flew over the city wall, skimming on the eaves as he floated out of the city. Yu Groom looked at Linya and said in a deep voice, Take care. Linya reached out to rub her brow. I am a woman and am not that sentimental. Can you men be a bit more mature? Yu Groom smiled and shook his head. He turned and left. He bent down and picked up the green-clothed girl that had climbed back up the city wall. She sat on his neck and opened the imperial edict. She said proudly, Imperial Edict. Yu Groom smiled gently. I know. Chapter 1079. The little girl opened the imperial edict and raised it above her head. She opened her eyes wide to read the words. Xiao Yu, where are we going next? I actually like this place, but Grandpa Sui went to the southern sea to compete with the Peach Blossom Sword God. We're going to the far north. It's a bit cold there, so you have to recite the secret that Master taught you. How far north is that? Forget it. Sister Lin always says you have no sense of direction. Xiao Yu, you won't lead us the wrong way, right? I don't think so. Eh? Xiao Yu, what do you say? Imperial Edict. What about this word? Lower it, let me take a look. On the city wall, Lin Yu walked to the side of the downtrodden young master with a tattered fan hanging from his waist. A rare, gentle expression appeared on his face. Zhao Go spent a lot of effort to get you out of Bailiang. Your father, Yuan Benshi, even made an exception to send you to the Eastern Sea. Are you going to continue being so depressed? The young man remained silent. Lin Yu sighed and patted his head. Silly child, there's no obstacle that can't be overcome. The young man muttered, I can lose to anyone, Gu Jiantang, the Wu family sword tomb patriarch, but I can't lose to Su Fengyan. Lin Yu interrupted him. Bulsh ****. Zhang Fuding, do you know how many times my master lost to Li Chungang? 6 years, 6 times. That's how he climbed from the Vajra realm to the heavenly image realm. Zhang Fuding smiled bitterly. Who do I think I am? How can I compare to Wang Xianji, who has been the world's #1 for 60 years? Lin Yu was furious. Just as he was about to speak, Zhang Fuding said, Don't try to persuade him. Zhang Fuding turned around and asked with a smile, Do you have wine? Lin Yu snorted. Just you wait. I'll drink you to death. Zhang Fuding suddenly pulled on Lin Yu's sleeve without saying anything. The tall Lin Yu pressed his hand on the back of his head and pulled him towards his shoulder. You men always want to be the world's #1. Especially you. Once you feel that there's no hope, you like to go to a dead end. Actually, why bother? Su Fengyan, that bastard, was truly treacherous. He was certain that you didn't dare to risk your life, so he purposely used his power to pressure you. Not only did he make you give up on being a pawn that had crossed the river, he also made you the prey of the Bailiang soldiers, slowly wearing down your spirit. He even purposely let you off, allowing Zhao Go to save you. Indeed, my master met Li Chungang back then. Your luck is too bad. Your archenemy is a guy without any grace. Lin Yu pushed Zhang Fuding away, patted her shoulder, and stretched her body. Forget it. Forget it. I don't want to stay in the martial emperor city and drink with you all day long. Women can't withstand such torment. They grow old quickly. This won't do. While I'm still pretty, I'll take a stroll in Jianghu and see if I can charm a few young heroes. Zhang Fuding watched her receding figure. His lips trembled, but he didn't say those 2 words in the end. This god's favored son who used to be brothers with Prince Zhao Kai sat dejectedly on top of the city wall. He looked at the East Sea tide rolling in from the west to the east. Dragon Gate Crossing. Further east was the old West Chu border. Liang had crossed the river here on Guangling's ice. He fought like a lion hunting a rabbit and forced the West Chu general Zhoujiang to surrender without a fight. However, as the world settled down, the Longmen Ferry was no longer as prosperous as it was in the spring and autumn period. The people nearby lived in peace and contentment. Compared to the undercurrent in the west, this place was still considered peaceful. They still worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. Previously, a monk and a Taoist lived here. When the imperial court destroyed Buddhism, countless monks lost their homes. Therefore, the temporary residence of these 2 people was not considered eye-catching. When the people in the village met with a small illness or disaster, they would ask the middle-aged Taoist for some folk medicine. The herbs in the medicine were easy to find. The Taoist priest named Wang also never took gold or silver. At most, he would take some grains and vegetables. He would not compete with others for small profits. Perhaps it was because this Taoist priest was too amiable that no one treated him as a Taoist deity. Some children liked to borrow his peach wood sword to play with. Although the Taoist priest was serious, most children had a pure heart and were more accurate in judging people. They knew that Taoist priest Wang would never get angry. On the other hand, the monk with the tattered kasaya was crazy. He liked to talk to people in a language that they didn't understand. When he was not crazy, he would stare at the Guangling River in a daze. Taoist priest Wang was afraid that he would be bored and made a bamboo fishing rod for the monk. The monk would often sit by the river for an entire day. His fish basket was empty and could not compare to the fisherman's children beside him. Today, in the twilight, the monk did not catch anything. He sat there motionless. The fisherman's children had already returned from a rewarding journey. They happened to meet Taoist priest Wang. After greeting him, they left happily. The Taoist priest stood beside the monk and asked with a smile, "Awake?" The monk nodded. The poor Taoist priest was the martial uncle of the current Wudong leader Li Yufu, the sword maniac Wang Xiaoping. The monk was not only the Fuwang of Mount Lantuo, but also the cult leader of the devil cult Lu Songtao of Mount Zhulu 100 years ago. He was also the famous useless monk in Jianghu. After the two met, they fought and fought, asked and answered. It was not until they reached the Dragon Gate ferry that Lu Songtao was more awake than asleep. Wang Xiaoping's attainment in the art of the sword advanced by leaps and bounds. Although he did not enter the top 15 of the new martial arts ranking, Wang Xiaoping could vaguely feel that he was only a foot away from that threshold. This threshold, his Shifu, De Shixiang, and Xiao Shidi, 3 successive Wudong leaders, all had their own opinions, but they all led to the same destination. In the beginning, Wang Xiaoping was an anomaly among the older generation of martial brothers. He focused more on the art than the Tao, and his temperament was not as gentle. He was the only one who gave Beiliang's heir apparent a hard time. If Wang Xiaoping, who used to be the world's #1 talisman sword god too, was the sharpest sword, then the current middle-aged Taoist priest's sharpness was much more restrained. The heavy sword had no edge. Wang Xiaoping squatted down, picked up a stone, and threw it into the river. When the monk next to him was asleep, he liked to talk nonsense in the eyes of the world. For example, he would grab a commoner and say, "This poor monk knows that you have a past life and a future life. If you reincarnate early, you can enjoy great fortune. Will you die?" This scared the commoner to death. Or he would ask others, "We were born between heaven and earth. Do we treat plants, trees, fish, and birds as our neighbors, or as fellow villagers?" Or he would ask himself, "What I think, and ask, is it destined by the heavens? What I don't think, and don't ask, is it also destined by the heavens? Since it's like this, how can I be truly free?" Moreover, this monk often did the act of asking Buddha by the river. He loudly asked, "Tathagata, how come? Joyful Buddha, what is joy?" And so on. This made the commoners feel inconceivable. However, considering that Taoist Wang was not strange, they did not report this to the authorities. Lu Songtao rarely swung the bamboo pole in his hand. He asked, "Are you still thinking about the matter of ice and charcoal in the same furnace?" Ancestor Lu clearly thought about this problem but couldn't explain it clearly. "You just have to make things difficult for yourself. What's the benefit?" Wang Xiaoping smiled and said, "Cultivating on Mount Wudong for 500 years. I've always insisted on doing small things. I don't want to be a big figure. What I do is nothing more than adding oil to the fire. Cultivating oneself doesn't seek to ascend to immortality, but to let nature take its course. Before this, I had to go down the mountain to travel, and I was even more busy cultivating others. Whether the world below the mountain is good or bad, it doesn't delay the birth of spring, the growth of summer, the harvest of autumn, and the storage of winter." You said that Ancestor Lu didn't clearly explain the root of the fusion of the 3 religions, but Mount Wudong has never had the rule that if the ancestors didn't do well, the descendants wouldn't do it. Just like the Guangling River in front of us. It flows fiercely, thanks to the water in the front opening the way and the water in the back walking. Neither can be missing. Otherwise, there wouldn't be the surging east flowing into the sea, and the grand spirit that has lasted for thousands of years. Lu Songtao sighed with emotion. "It's difficult." Wang Xiaoping turned her head and asked, "Have you thought it through?" Lu Songtao nodded and said, "Lu Songtao wants to find someone for himself. The old monk of Mount Lantuo wants to stop someone for the sake of the world's Buddhist legacy. Since we know that the person we're looking for is no longer here, there's no need to search." Wang Xiaoping smiled and asked, "I once promised little junior brother that it's probably the same person you're trying to stop. When the time comes, will you go first or should I?" Lu Songtao said calmly, "You go first. When the time comes, I can still recite a few sutras for you. Besides, I can't die for the time being. If I can't stop him, then I can't stop him." I'll just make way. But you, Wang Xiaoping, or your sword, can't. Wang Xiaoping said, That's fine too. When it comes to praying for blessings and averting calamities, I'm far inferior compared to my brothers. Lu Songtao smiled and said, Your sword is a good sword. If it were 100 years ago, I would still appreciate it. Wang Xiaoping, who had always been cold, suddenly laughed for no reason. She remembered the time when she was at Mount Wudong, when the young man who practiced the knife went to the purple bamboo forest to flatter him. He said that his swordsmanship was extraordinary and his swordsmanship was godly. In reality, it should be that cheap word, right? No wonder little junior brother was secretly happy at that time, but didn't dare to laugh out loud. Su Yambing left the border of Beiliang alone and stopped at the border between Yuzhou and River Prefecture. There was also a young girl who left Beiliang after visiting the grave. She carried a tender sunflower that had not yet turned golden. She didn't walk quickly because she didn't want to see old Huang. She wore an unfashionable mink hat. It was unknown who had given it to her, but she was so reluctant to part with it. Chapter 1080. In Bishan district, there were those who were happy and those who were sad. Those who were happy were those who knew their place. They had long pledged allegiance to the county yaman's Fengguan and the other officials. Those who were a step slower were worried that if they wanted to become the honored guests of these important people, they would no longer be able to do so with just 100 or 200 taels of silver. County Magistrate Fengguan could be said to be riding on a wave of success. Yanji County's County Chief Hong Shandong personally came to the Bishan District Yamen to commend him. The county's wealthy Zhu family also took the lead in donating 3,000 taels of silver. In one night, they had gathered nearly 10,000 taels of silver. Of course, the eldest grandson of the Zhu family was also able to enter the county Yamen's torture chamber. However, Zhu Jingli wasn't too happy about it. This was because even though Brother Su had survived the disaster, he clearly had no place in Bishan district anymore. He heard that Fengguan had mentioned, intentionally or otherwise, to the prefectural governor Hong Shandong, that this young registrar had done many strange things on Golden Chicken Mountain. If it weren't for head of patrol officers Wang Shiwei's guarantee, the registrar position that Su Qi had spent so much money to buy would probably be in jeopardy. Zhu Jingli specially made a trip to the private residence and brought back 2 jars of Jianan spring wine. He originally wanted to say a few words of consolation, but in the end, he was so angry that Su Qi, this bastard, could still smile. Instead, he gave him a basket of red-belly golden chicken, saying that if he didn't play with it himself, it would definitely be worth it if he gave it to the children of Yanji County. Zhu Jingli was not in the mood to play with the basket of rare birds. He was worried that Su Qi would soon pack up and leave Bishan district. When that time came, who would he find to drink with? Zhu Jingli had no choice but to reveal his secret. He said that his family had accumulated some incense in Yanji County and that he could help Su Qi put in a good word. He didn't dare to say that he would be promoted, but he had to at least keep his registrar position. He didn't expect that this bastard would not appreciate his kindness and instead spouted a bunch of reasons. He said that his Zhu family had not had a young person who could shoulder the burden for so many years, and that the incense that his seniors had accumulated in the officialdom would be used up every time they were used. He also said that it would be difficult to make a profit on Su Qi. That day, Zhu Zhengli was dead drunk and it was Su Qi who carried him to the door of his house. When he went to look for her the next day, the woman who was addressed as Madame Su by everyone in the county yamen was still there. However, she said that Su Qi had taken a leave of absence and went to Mount Wudong to relax. When Zhu Zhengli heard this damned news, he squatted on the steps and sulked. This guy surnamed Su was too disloyal. Once he encountered a little trouble, he abandoned his wife and brothers and ran away to hide himself. Zhu Zhengli lowered his head, lost in thought, and occasionally sighed. That refined and quiet woman, who he didn't know whether to call her sister-in-law or sister-in-law, was actually much, much calmer than a big man like him. She was scooping out a ladle of water from the water jar and splashing it on a small vegetable patch at the corner of the wall. After Zhu Zhengli came back to his senses, he hurriedly stood up and prepared to leave. Although he had only been here for a few minutes and was not afraid of a crooked shadow, there were always too many gossiping women and dirty men in the neighborhood. If some rumors spread, it would be easy for the atmosphere to change. When Su Qi returned and heard the nonsense, it was possible that they wouldn't even be brothers anymore. Zhu Jingli jumped down the steps and said goodbye. The woman didn't urge him to stay. She put down the gourd ladle in her hand and scattered a handful of rice for the chickens and ducks in the cages. She walked back to the empty house and sat on the bench. Looking at the courtyard outside the house, the corners of the walls were green and the crowing of the chickens could be heard. She was a little annoyed. Not because he came and went in a hurry and didn't treat this place as his home. She just remembered that when he was the registrar, every day when he returned to the courtyard at dusk, he would be able to smoothly drive the chickens and ducks back to the cages. However, when he wasn't around, she would always be exhausted from doing this work and might not succeed. Yesterday, a hen that had just started laying eggs went missing. This made Pei Nanwei very angry, so she simply didn't open the cages today. Pei Nanwei looked at the sky and remembered that there were still a few pieces of his clothes hanging on the bamboo pole. She walked to the backyard and wrapped them around her arm one by one. Su Fengnian hadn't climbed Mount Wudong since he entered the state of mind and went to the top of Little Lotus Peak to practice his saber. After passing the stone memorial arch, Su Fengnian went up the steps alone. He didn't bring a single retainer with him, nor did he notify the authorities at the foot of the mountain. As a result, there wasn't any activity to welcome him on the mountain. However, as luck would have it, the old Taoist Song Jiming would come to the memorial arch every few days to wait for someone. Today, the old Taoist slowly walked down from Big Lotus Peak and coincidentally bumped into Su Fengnian. Song Jiming, who was the oldest on the mountain, turned around with a smile. He didn't say anything about not being able to meet him from afar and just accompanied the young king of Beiliang up the mountain. The old man couldn't help but sigh. The mountain was so cold and cheerless. Senior brother Wang and junior brother were no longer here. Junior brother Li Yufu, who was the sect leader, had yet to return. Junior brother Wang had also left the mountain to travel for some time. In the end, only these old men with whiter hair were left to look after the house. How boring was this? There were some good seedlings on the mountain, but they weren't as free and easy as junior brother and sect leader Li Yufu. They were also thin-skinned and couldn't take the teasing of these old fellows. Some of the jokes, especially coming from the mouth of Chun Yao, who was in charge of Wudong's discipline, were unbearably cold. Most of the juniors trembled in fear. Song Jiming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chun Yao, this old urchin, asked them in a serious manner if they had met any young and beautiful female pilgrims. It wasn't like he was afraid that their cultivation would be delayed or their Tao hearts would be damaged. In fact, this old fellow was just teasing the juniors because he had nothing better to do. Song Jiming was no longer obsessed with alchemy and rarely fiddled with the pill furnaces. He would often wander around the mountain. If he didn't see sect leader Li Yufu at the mountain gate, he would return to the mountain and look at the purple bamboo forest, the turtle-carrying tablet, and the celestial phenomenon pond. When the Taoist children from the various Taoist temples on the mountain met this old and senior Taoist, they couldn't help but feel that Grandmaster Song was really old. Su Fengnian and Song Jiming walked along the mountain path of varying width, slowly walking towards Little Lotus Peak. Su Fengnian said softly, "Last time at Spring God Lake, I arbitrarily invited Beiliang's Dharma image in advance and set up the 81 Dynasties ceremony for you. Caused a lot of trouble. I'm a snob, but fortunately, I don't like to say false words of courtesy. If there's anything you need Beiliang to do on the mountain, don't hesitate to ask." Song Jiming waved his hand and said with a smile, "It's not a business deal, so there's no need to talk about getting back the money. Ancestor Lu once left behind a precept that Wudong Mountain has the word Dang. One of the Dang is to take responsibility." Su Fengnian didn't say anything else. Song Jiming continued, "Your Highness oversees the Northwest Gate and can be said to be one man guarding the pass. There's also the word Dang. No wonder you have fate with Wudong Mountain." Su Fengnian stopped walking and looked at the clouds in the sky above Little Lotus Peak. He sighed and said, "To tell you the truth, Wang Xianji rushed to Beiliang this time and caught me off guard. I could only come to Wudong Mountain to be a big rat in this paradise. There are only so many places for Earth immortals. In the past, whoever ascended first would be replaced by the next person. I'm different from Wang Xianji. I forced my way up, and it just so happened to be his place. Therefore, Wang Xianji came to find trouble. After all, he's not a Taoist enlightened master. No matter how high his martial arts realm is or how profound his cultivation is, he can't pass the gate of heaven without entering. Song Jiming asked in reply, if the people on the mountain tightly hold onto the blessings of the paradise for generation after generation, how different would they be from the misers at the foot of the mountain? Song Jiming quickly smiled and said, when it's time to accumulate blessings, when it's time to scatter, scatter luck. Only this can be considered as flowing water not rotting. Otherwise, no matter how deep the secluded pool is, it's just a big puddle of smelly water that makes people loathe it. Of course, it's not because you, Su Fengnian, are the son of the great general that you can take whatever you want. It's because the one who's blocking Bailiang's million control bowstring experts is you, the king of Bailiang. What you take is roughly equal to what you pay. Old Taoist and a few of my martial brothers have often mentioned you. Especially after you became the 6th in the world, we wanted you to really pull down that Wang Xianji. In the future, other things aside, if word gets out that the king of Bailiang used to practice the saber and martial arts on this mountain, there will at least be more pilgrims, right? Su Fengnian said softly, when I first went on an out-of-body spiritual journey, I saw a child somewhere in Jiangnan. Later, I told the headmaster, Li Yufu. I don't know how he is now. Song Jiming smiled and said, old Taoist knows that I don't have long to live. I've waited for half a year, but it's likely that I won't be able to see him. But it doesn't matter if I can't wait. This pair of martial uncle and martial nephew, or master and disciple, can just come up the mountain. Su Fengnian nodded. Song Jiming suddenly said, old Taoist has a request. Su Fengnian was just about to agree when Song Jiming suddenly moved and heavily punched him on the shoulder. Su Fengnian smiled and didn't take it to heart. Old Taoist snorted and said, no matter what, the headmaster and my martial brother, one died because of you, and the other was disbanded because of your big sister. Old Taoist has a lot of resentment in his heart. I originally thought that I would take it to the grave with me, but you came to me yourself. Even if I can't beat you, Su Fengnian? Su Fengnian smiled and said, Taoist Song, if you're still angry, how about another punch? Song Jiming turned around and left with a straight face, saying, forget it. If I annoy you, the grand leader of 300,000 cavalry, the small Wudong mountain won't be able to bear the consequences. Su Fengnian dismissed it with a smile and walked alone to the top of Little Lotus Peak. Song Jiming, who was walking down the mountain with his back to Su Fengnian, secretly grimaced and cursed in his heart. Motherf asterisk cur, worthy of being number 6 in the world. He didn't even fight back, but his entire arm was in so much pain. If he had known earlier, he would have been gentler. Chapter 1081. Su Fengnian walked to the side of the tortoise-carrying tablet at the peak of the mountain and exhaled. Next, it was not as simple as a mental journey. He was going to take a look at the spring and autumn period. As for whether he would see the battle at the Western Wall, the 10 years of defense at Xiang Fan City, or Li Chuangong's Sword Chi Rolling Dragon Wall in the Western Shu Imperial Palace, nothing was certain. Anyway, it was a last-minute effort, so he would see as much as he could. If Wang Xianji rushed too quickly on the east-west front, with Su Fengnian's current realm, which was higher than number 6 in the world, he would definitely die. Huang Sanjia had purposely placed Su Fengnian in this mediocre position during the martial arts evaluation. His original intention was for Su Fengnian to die a little later, so that Su Fengnian could replenish his realm of fate and save Lady Hehe according to the agreement. By then, whether Su Fengnian lived or died, it would have nothing to do with Huang Longshi. In the world, Huang Sanjia was definitely not the most fair when it came to doing business, but he was definitely an old turtle that did not want to lose out. Su Fengnian pressed down on the back of the tortoise and closed his eyes. 800 years ago, there was the Great Qin. 400 years ago, the Great Feng dynasty only had one less Great Feng than the Great Qin. Are you waiting for me? The 800-mile-long spring god lake was like a huge turtle slowly rising to the surface of the water. In Great Peace City, the golden body statue of the Jinwu Great Emperor holding the Shinto talisman sword also started to shake. Su Fengnian stretched out a finger and wiped his eyebrows. The current situation was far more than just an emergency. Since that was the case, he could only do extraordinary things in extraordinary times. Su Fengyan burped and spat out a mouthful of purple gold fog. He learned from the Beimang Grand Tutor Yuan Qingshan, holding a Su Fengyan in each hand and going to the spring and autumn period together. The departure of Wang Xianji from Martial Emperor City quickly set off a huge commotion in the Wulin world. However, by the time this perilous wave was rolling up and down in the Jianghu, a snow-haired old man in hemp clothing and hemp shoes had already passed through more than half of the old West Chu's territory and arrived at the thickest section of the Guangling River on a ferry. The tall and sturdy old man stood at the bow of the ferry. Although he was eye-catching, there were countless experts who could roam the Jianghu. The old man was only slightly taller and stronger, and he did not have a weapon with him, so he could not be considered as shocking. Some of the Jianghu people who were good at currying favor did not try to worm their way into the old man's acquaintance. After all, it was always beneficial to support each other outside. However, after a few of them tried to strike up a conversation, they did not receive any response. In the end, they gave up resentfully and silently cursed the old man for putting on airs as an expert. The hemp-clothed old man stood quietly at the bow of the boat, gazing at the river in the distance. The aura around his body suddenly condensed, and the vast river wind that was blowing against the sails seemed to stop. The large two-story ferry was like a leaf floating on the river for no reason at all, and it spun around on the river. Everyone was shocked and at a loss as they looked around. There had always been a rumor in the streets that there was a flood dragon on the Guangling River. Ancestor Lu had once killed it with his flying sword. Later on, Li Chungang in green had also performed a similar feat when he crossed the river with his flying sword. 100 zhang ahead, there was a motionless lone boat. A woman stood proudly. Her purple robe fluttered in the wind. Purple robe blocking the river. With the release of the new martial arts evaluation, the entire Jianghu was guessing why the tide-listening pavilion's Nangong Push was only one level away, and why the Great Snow Plateau's purple robe was only one level away. Only the old people who were familiar with the wars of the spring and autumn period would know that on either side of this lone boat and the purple robe, there were two huge ruins made of stone. They were 20 zhang tall, and erected on either side of the river were two iron pillars that were now covered in rust. The stone pillars faced each other and were originally built in the Dafeng dynasty. They had once successfully blocked the southern invasion of the barbarians from the north. They only needed to pull up a few iron chains to seal off the Guangling River. Most of the iron chains were slightly hidden under the water and would only surface during the dry season. Later on, the West Chu general guarding the river rebelled and personally burned off the iron chains. Only then did the tragic story of the iron chains sinking into the river. It was said that when the people of the Dechu behind the western wall heard the grievous news, they wept endlessly. Later on, there was no lack of fishermen who were familiar with the water. After receiving a huge reward from some survivors of the spring and autumn period, they wanted to explore the bottom of the river and search for the iron chains. Unfortunately, they did not succeed. Those survivors could only throw down the money and return in distress. Later on, the Liang imperial court became more stable and the world became more peaceful. There were fewer and fewer such fools. In the past few years, no one cared whether or not the iron chains at the bottom of the Guangling River were really there or not. The old man at the front of the ferry was somewhat surprised. It was reasonable for people to block the way, but he did not expect that she would be the first. That woman already had the two prominent identities of the Wulin Alliance Master and the Bull descendant Shenyuan family master, but she did not care about her life. After he abandoned the city, he was not as easy to talk to as he was in the Martial Emperor city. In the past, he cherished each and every talent in the Wulin Alliance, not because he, Wang Xianji, had a bodhisattva's heart and compassion for everyone, but because he hoped that these people could reach the top of the martial Tao, and that there would be a martial artist who could stand side by side with him in the end. Now that he had left the city and the Eastern Sea, his goal was very clear. He only wanted to find the king of Bailiang. The others were not in his eyes at all. If they came to pick a fight in front of him and acted recklessly, he would not mind killing them one by one. It would be good to pave the way for his last battle in the world. Wang Xianji raised his head and looked at the sky. After the world, there was only the sky. Chapter 1082. The bow of the ferry began to slowly sink until the stern was raised up high. However, the ferrymen who were falling forward were blocked by an invisible wall in the middle of the ferry. The group of people huddled together in a sorry state as they watched the hemp-clothed old man still standing at the bow of the ferry. The purple-clothed woman bent down and tied a knot on the hem of her dress, creating a dead knot. She stood up and looked at the number one in the world in the distance who was ready to fight. Shenyuan Qingfeng, who had unknowingly walked down Mount Hui, didn't feel any regret when she encountered the human cat, who was invincible below Earth immortals. In the western regions, her fear was one thing, but more importantly, she didn't want to use her full strength. Later, that person wanted to fight the human cat to the death. She still didn't want to die in vain. So she withdrew again and even drew a line with Beiliang to win the favor of Liang's Zhao Shi. She also became the first female Wulin chief in several hundred years, admired by the world. Disloyal? She never denied that she was ungrateful, but she was a woman. What was the point of being loyal? In fact, when she heard that Wang Xianji had left the city to rush to Beiliang, she didn't want to get involved. After reaching the great celestial phenomenon stage by absorbing the fate of the imperial jade seal and devouring the cultivation of nearly 100 experts, she was even more aware of the invincible spirit of the top three. She had already seen the last threshold, so she should cherish her life even more. However, after she dug out the 3 jars of daughter's red buried by her father, Shenyuan Jingcheng, she wanted to get drunk, but the more she drank, the more sober she became. That night, she lay on the roof of a tall building and stared at the small words at the bottom of a bottle for a long time. Later, she quietly went down the mountain. Facing the number 10 in the world, she retreated. But facing Wang Xianji, who had been invincible for 60 years, she came. At this moment, Shenyuan Qingfeng said self-mockingly, "Are you stupid?" Shenyuan Qingfeng smiled. "There's no cure. Then don't save me. Do you think you can run away now? If you can't run, then let's fight. It's not a big deal." Shenyuan Qingfeng's eyes suddenly became determined. She stretched out an arm, her fingers like hooks, and the river beside the boat boiled. A huge iron chain broke through the surface of the river like a black dragon. Shenyuan Qingfeng grabbed one end of the iron chain. With a tap of his foot, the small boat shattered. The purple-clothed woman dragged the iron chain that was more than 600 meters long and began to run wildly on the river surface. With a flick of her wrist, the iron chain twisted in a huge arc in the blink of an eye, like a scorpion swinging its tail, and ruthlessly smashed towards the ferry. The old man at the front of the ferry leaped high into the air, and the entire bow of the ferry abruptly plunged into the river. Then, it was hit by the downward force of the river, and was pushed back to the surface of the water, and rapidly slid backward. Wang Xianji rushed into the air, directly facing the descending metal chain with the force of a thunderbolt. On the surface of the Guangling River, it was as if an immortal had split open the river surface with a sword, dividing north and south from east. Wang Xianji's face was expressionless. She allowed the fierce wind to smash down and grabbed the iron chain with one hand. Wang Xianji did not grab the iron chain immediately. Instead, she slid a few feet between her thumb and index finger. Sparks flew everywhere. Wang Xianji clenched her fist and broke the iron chain. The explosion was louder than summer thunder. The river surface under her feet exploded, and huge waves rose to the sky. The purple-clothed woman was indifferent to the breaking of the iron chain. She stopped, withdrew her hand a few inches, and then extended it a few inches again. The whip and iron chain nimbly and viciously turned into the tip of a spear, piercing straight towards Wang Xianji's chest. Wang Xianji stretched out her palm and blocked the tip of the spear. Her body tilted slightly as she fell. The tip of the spear was like a lit firecracker, turning into fine powder section by section. The vibrations continued without end. The woman, who was unwilling to let go, was knocked into the river by the vast and boundless force. With the purple-clothed woman as the center, a magnificent splash suddenly bloomed on the surface of the Guangling River. The woman's figure could no longer be seen on the river. Before Wang Xianji landed on the river surface, She threw the black iron chain that was more than 10 feet long at the woman who had almost sunk to the bottom of the river. Wang Xianji did not care about her life or death. When her feet touched the water surface, she bent her knees and squatted. Her 10 fingers clenched into a fist, and she smashed the river surface under her feet. The entire river surface was smashed into a water bowl. The river water in the bowl suddenly overflowed the shore, and in the center of the bowl, the water level dropped sharply. It was obvious that she wanted to crush the woman at the bottom of the bowl into a pile of meat paste. Wang Xianji, who was not in a hurry to get up, said indifferently, "Hide? Su Fengyan has 300,000 iron cavalry, but they can't hide. Where can you hide?" Wang Xianji did not wait for the turbulent river to calm down. She put her 2 fingers together and tapped the water surface under her feet. Every time she tapped, a dragon would emerge from the river surface and then hover in the air. In the blink of an eye, there were 18 green dragons on the river. Wang Xianji stood up and waved her sleeve. There was the green-clothed swordsman and the 2-sleeved green snake. After that, there was Wang Xianji's sleeve that roamed the green dragon. After a wave of her sleeve, the head and tail of the green dragon connected and pierced into the water surface. The river and the sea were overturned. Wang Xianji crossed her arms in front of her chest, waiting for the woman to be driven out of the water to her death. Under the water surface, there were dozens of rapid and dull sounds. When the woman appeared on the river surface, there were countless broken iron chains wrapped around her. Zi stood on one of the iron chains placed horizontally on the river surface. Blood seeped out of the corner of her mouth. Wang Xianji was still more than 80 feet away from the woman. He raised one arm and put the other behind him. She punched through the air. Bang! A fan-shaped curtain of qi appeared beside the old man. Then, the woman in purple's iron chains pounced forward crazily and were torn to shreds in an instant. There was another loud bang. Zi was knocked out. Even though she was constantly being pulled by the chaotic qi, trying to stop her from falling back, it was futile. She kept falling back until her body hit the wall of the gorge, creating a huge depression. It was like a grave. Chapter 1083. With a seemingly casual punch, the purple-clothed woman was forcefully embedded into the canyon wall. Wang Xianji only glanced at her but did not pursue her. Instead, she leaped back to the ferry. There were still water stains on the deck. Without the old immortal's order, the ferry continued to move forward. No one dared to get close to the ship, and they all whispered to each other. Nowadays, purple clothing was all the rage in the world. Some pretty young heroines in Jianghu all liked to wear purple clothes and dresses. Those on the ship who had been in Jianghu before were not sure that the purple dress blocking the river was the current Wulin Alliance leader. If the woman was Shenyuan Qingfeng, the house master of Great Snow Plains, then who else could the old man standing at the bow of the ship who could beat her into a pulp be? The ferry under Wang Xianji's feet moved forward slowly. Before crossing the gorge, they were getting closer and closer to the new grave. The Jianghu people and common people on the ferry were on tenterhooks. Wang Xianji did not look sideways. At the cliff of the gorge, there was a slight sound of gravel falling into the river. The loose purple clothes were like living vines and grass after winter. They grew again when the spring breeze blew, and like overflowing water, they seeped out of the stone pit. Strands of purple clung to the stone wall. Everyone on the ferry was scared out of their wits. Could the woman really be the incarnation of the unkillable evil dragon of Guangling River? The woman wrapped in purple slowly floated out of the grave. She stretched out a hand and pressed it against her mouth. However, scarlet blood still seeped through the gaps between her fingers. Reaching the celestial state named by Gao Shulu 400 years ago, the flow of qi and the birth and death of qi were extremely fast. If the Shen finger state was to see the qi of all things in the world and change the rules, then wait for an opportunity to knock the finger and ask or cut off or help the process, then the celestial state was to feel the entire vein and act according to the situation. However, Gao Shulu once said that the celestial state was the gatekeeper of the courtyard in the human world. She also understood the principle of beating a dog depends on its master. Ordinary celestial state masters would inevitably be tainted by qi when they killed people. Han Shangxian deliberately stayed at the Xian finger state for his whole life so that he could be more unscrupulous when he killed a Jianghu master. Xianyuan Qingfeng used the original method created by her ancestor Xianyuan Pan to crazily absorb other people's qi and qi to strengthen her own strength. The first batch of senior masters in Mount Hui almost all died for no reason. Every month, she would secretly go down the mountain to look for fresh food. This was no longer a case of a rabbit not eating the grass near its burrow, but a helpless action when there was no grass near its burrow to eat. Xianyuan Qingfeng was like a female Pishio, going further and further on this unorthodox path. Her graceful figure floated out of the dilapidated mountain wall. Not only did the large sleeves of her purple robe not diminish her charm, but it also added to the mystery of this Wulin chief. Wang Xianji's punch had destroyed her first breath. During the time the fairy was traveling, it gave her a chance to regenerate her qi. In fact, when she was chased by the green dragon sleeve at the bottom of Guangling River, Xianyuan Qingfeng had already forcefully regenerated her qi. At that time, she had two options. After breaking the green dragon sleeve, she could avoid the sharp edge and hide at the bottom of the river. However, she still used her qi to pull the iron chain out of the river, which almost took Wang Xianji's punch head-on. Sure enough, before the fairy entered the gorge, Xianyuan Qingfeng looked at Wang Xianji's side and stretched out a hand. Wang Xianji's figure, which was standing proudly at the bow of the ferry, flashed and disappeared. The ferry under her feet was like an arrow released from a bow. It suddenly split the river surface and quickly crashed into the gorge. The ferry passengers who were in a mess obviously did not have the chance to see the battle between the peak of the Wulin of Liang. Xianyuan Qingfeng pressed his hands down, and his body floated up more than 10 feet against the cliff wall. Wang Xianji followed him like a shadow. The tip of her foot first stepped on the edge of the hole, and then, as if she was walking on flat ground, she chased after the purple figure up the mountain wall. Xianyuan Qingfeng pulled with both hands. The countless black iron chains hidden at the foot of the cliff clattered and climbed up the mountain rocks. They clustered together and twisted together, crazily chasing after the burly old man's back. Wang Xianji, who was sliding on the mountain wall with both feet, turned a deaf ear to the black mass of iron snakes behind him. Xianyuan Qingfeng's arms knocked backward, and his 5 fingers drilled into the stone wall like a purple gecko nailed to the wall. The purple robe crashed into the mountain and suddenly spread out, and then instantly covered its owner's body, wrapping him into an airtight cocoon. It spat out thousands of silk threads, using the iron chains to force Wang Xianji's qi dynamic out, and then used the silk to chase after the unique path of Wang Xianji's qi dynamic. The bright red silk threads and the black iron chains rapidly intertwined, trying to crush Wang Xianji, who was trapped in it. This was a trap that covered the sky and the sun. Wang Xianji was strolling leisurely in it. As he moved forward, the silk chains moved with him, and rocks kept falling into the river, stirring up layers of waves. Wang Xianji's qi dynamic did not show any signs of swelling like an ordinary master's, but it was enough to prevent the endless silk chains from getting close to him. The old man did the opposite. He withdrew most of his qi dynamic, and allowed the spider web to tightly grip his body that was said to be even more invincible than the Buddha's Vajra, leaving only his head exposed. Wang Xianji's speed was not the fastest in the first 4 realms. To this day, even though he, the Lord of Martial Emperor City, had been the world's #1 for 60 years, he had not won the first 3 realms. In the Vajra realm, there was the white-robed monk Li Dongxin, and in the mysterious finger realm, there was Dong Tai. Even without the peach blossom sword god, there was still Han Shangxian, and in the celestial phenomenon realm, there was Chao Chongqing. However, in the Jianghu where the 4 grandmasters lived, Li Chungang had almost won all 3 realms. Other than losing to the dragon tree monk in the Vajra realm, he was the champion of the mysterious finger and celestial phenomenon realm. However, this did not prevent Wang Xianji from having the last laugh, becoming the only one who had reached the peak of martial arts in the past 500 years. Therefore, when Wang Xianji deliberately withdrew his qi dynamic and allowed Xianyuan Qingfeng to have his way, the purple-dressed mountain master immediately gave up the idea of strangling this old monster. He decisively broke out of the cocoon and continued to float upwards. At the same time, the silk chains exploded, and purple and black powder scattered in all directions. The entire cliff began to shake violently under the huge impact of the fog. Chapter 1084. Shenyuan Qingfeng's purple robe was no longer as intense as before. His robe, which was even more flawless than the best work in the Imperial Weaving Bureau, had already lost some of its luster. Wang Xianji was still walking up the mountain wall at a moderate pace, just slightly faster than this old man. She even had the time to chat, and her tone was calm. The martial arts in the world are divided into the Tao of Arts. Ancestor Lu shouldered the Tao of Heaven, and this old man sincerely admires him. After Li Chungang, the Tao of Swordsmanship has withered away. Dong Tai's Tao of Arts is also worthy of this old man's attention. The Tao of Swordsmanship used to fall on Chao Chongqing's shoulders, and these years, he still hasn't been able to break away from the mold of the ancients. Shenyuan Qingfeng, your Tao of Arts is but a mirage. There's no need for a huge wave. Just a gust of wind can blow it away. If you encounter an ordinary person outside of martial arts, you can still scare them a little. This old man originally thought that you were a woman, and that martial arts cultivation is not easy. Purple Robe suddenly stopped retreating, and said sternly, "Woman? So what if I'm a woman?" Shenyuan Qingfeng also stepped on the cliff wall. She and Wang Xianji seemed to be standing on the same side of a mirror, and they collided head-on. Wang Xianji, with one hand behind her back, allowed the fist to hit her shoulder. She lightly tapped her fist between the woman's eyebrows. Wang Xianji didn't move at all, and Shenyuan Qingfeng didn't move much either. She only swung her head back slightly. The biggest movement was on the cliff wall beneath their feet, which became more and more obvious. As Shenyuan Qingfeng's head swayed, her sleeves were also torn apart, revealing two pink and tender wrists. However, this kind of redness wasn't the seductiveness of a woman's natural beauty. Instead, it was a kind of sickly scene. Blood flowed and surged under her snow-white skin in a visible form. A boneless person. You have to give up something when you gain something. The Qingfeng of the Mount Hui Mountain's Mountain Lord was really too unconventional. In order to absorb the internal energy of those external cultivators, as well as withstand the counterattack of those experts who died in her hands, she didn't hesitate to smelt her own body into a living pool, melting others and herself. Naturally, Wang Xianji had already seen through this crazy woman's background, and didn't have the slightest bit of pity. Seeing that she didn't know what was good for her, he suddenly exerted force with his fist, knocking this laughable Wulian Alliance master back several dozen feet. He then swept across to Shenyuan Qingfeng with one step, and grabbed her slender neck. Wang Xianji, who had one hand behind his back all this time, grabbed this body. His body spun, and after accumulating a bit of strength, he loosened his 5 fingers and threw the woman in purple several dozen feet above the cliff wall. Wang Xianji continued to walk upwards, and the hand behind his back clenched into a fist. A water column forcibly drew water from the river and soared into the sky. If later generations were to mention it, they would probably call it the Guangling sword. The scabbard was the Guangling River, and the body of the sword was the river water. Wang Xianji's one sleeve of azure dragons was indefinite. At this moment, the old man was about to use this water sword that leaped over his head to pierce through the stubborn woman's body and nail her to death in the air. This kind of fresh way of dying in front of everyone's eyes could be considered worthy of her current status and her courage to block the river and fight to the death. The water sword's momentum was astonishing. It followed the cliff wall swiftly and violently, and indeed struck the woman in purple whose qi had mostly dissipated. However, this water sword, which was as thick as the mouth of a well, did not pierce through Shenyuan Qingfeng's body. Instead, it was blocked by a blurry ivory-white fog. The fog spread out and formed a fan shape. The water sword was like a needle piercing a bronze mirror, and the fog gradually dissipated. However, Wang Xianji, who was walking upwards, did not have the patience. He raised a hand, and the water column instantly expanded from the size of a well to the size of a courtyard at the entrance to Jiangnan's water village. This was no longer a needle piercing a mirror, but a crude scene of a large hammer smashing a mirror. This was not all. Several water columns of the same size were pulled by Wang Xianji's qi. They surged out of the water and shot towards the sky. Every dragon that emerged from the water contained Wang Xianji's abundant qi. With the cliff wall as a line, the water columns made a half-arc, and all of them just happened to collide with the fog. Wang Xianji walked to the top of the cliff and sneered without saying a word. No wonder this woman could be so rebellious. Someone had given or lent her a portion of the nation's qi. Shenyuan Qingfeng's life was hanging by a thread, but he did not resign himself to death. He stood up on the mirror with difficulty, and his hands formed a sword shape. The tip of the sword was pointed downwards, directly at Wang Xianji's head. The qi of the imperial jade seal that had been transferred to her began to rotate. It was pulled away from the mirror and condensed on her hand and sword. Shenyuan Qingfeng roared angrily. He pressed down with both hands. The first water dragon's water sword was instantly shattered. The water columns that were originally hitting the mirror were also affected by this qi of the sword. They changed sides and followed the invisible qi of the sword, smashing towards Wang Xianji's head. Wang Xianji sneered softly. How could a tiny bit of qi of the imperial jade seal compete with the brilliance of the sun and the moon? This martial artist no longer clasped his hands behind his back. Instead, his 5 fingers formed a hook. He slid a few inches on the ground of the cliff, and his knees were slightly bent. This was probably the first time the martial Emperor City's city lord had truly made a move. After Shenyuan Qingfeng's sword strike, he was already bankrupt. He could only wait for death to come if he maintained the strange posture of holding the sword. Wang Xianji leapt up in an instant. The entire cliff top was pressed down by several feet. Without waiting for the bottom of the cliff to make a sound, the majestic qi that poured down from above had already repelled the waves of Guangling that were crashing into the cliff. Be it the qi of the sword or the water columns, they were neither blocked nor smashed. They even seemed to have lost their target and randomly smashed onto the already precarious cliff. Wang Xianji had already arrived above the head of the purple-clothed woman. With one punch, she smashed this reckless woman off the cliff and into the river in the distance. It seemed to be a punch, but before Shenyuan Qingfeng's body fell into the Guangling River, the purple-clothed woman's body paused several times in the air. What followed was a thunderous boom, and the purple-clothed woman's qi dispersed again and again. It seemed that Wang Xianji was still not satisfied with her celestial phenomenon realm cultivation. The old man raised his left hand, and the purple-clothed woman who was about to dive into the river was suspended in the air. His right hand once again punched the fingernail-sized figure in the distance. The powerful fist aura tore through the sky like a white rainbow, and directly hit the dying purple-clothed woman who was hovering in the air. Chapter 1085. Shenyuan Qingfeng could only watch helplessly as the fist aura flew towards him. Perhaps in the eyes of a level 2 master, even the lady of the Great Snow Meadow couldn't withstand a single blow. Ordinary martial artists felt that as long as they were lucky enough to reach the celestial phenomenon realm, the qi in their body would be able to connect heaven and earth, and they would be inexhaustible. This perception couldn't be said to be wrong, but it was only half correct. Celestial phenomenon realm experts weren't gods on earth. Gao Shulu once compared the experts of this realm to the Kunlun Peak, who sat on top of the Kunlun Peak and looked at the ocean. One was still climbing the mountain while the other had already reached the peak. Therefore, as long as someone destroyed this ladder, they would be unable to move forward. Han Diaosi was good at killing celestial phenomenon realm experts, and because of this human cat's finger, it was the most suitable for destroying ladders. However, Han Shengxian needed to get close to the body to do this, while Wang Xianji didn't. From the beginning to the end, this martial Emperor City's city lord didn't get close to Shenyuan Qingfeng. She broke the lock with her bare hands, used the azure dragon to enter the water, and threw 2 punches. Even if they walked along the cliff, the distance between them wasn't close. At this moment, Shenyuan Qingfeng's mind was blank, and he couldn't remember anything. He couldn't remember the long osmanthus rain on Mount Hui, the fragrance of Newer Hong, or the rainstorm on the Great Snow Meadow. When she exhaled a mouthful of turbid qi, it was equivalent to letting go of her last breath. She let her remaining qi dissipate, and even her purple robe fluttered in the wind. Xianyuan Qingfeng closed his eyes, and his heart was as still as water. The last thought in his mind was that the debt between them was settled. When he was young, he didn't know much about the world and always liked to ask his bookworm father about this and that. Somehow, he asked about love. His father had always liked to understand the word love, and he used the word clear to explain the word love. The two words beside the two words were water and heart, respectively. When one's heart was as still as water, when one truly let go, only then would the debt between them be settled. Wang Xianji stood at the top of the cliff and frowned when she saw the purple robe hit by the long rainbow. This lady realized something before her death, but it was too late. It wasn't that Wang Xianji couldn't change her mind and destroy the fist herself and let the lady live. But the old man Donglin Jianji was 60 years old. Just as the white rainbow fist was about to explode Xianyuan Qingfeng, Wang Xianji suddenly turned her head and looked at the left bank of Guangling River. As far as she could see, a middle-aged Taoist ran to the iron pillar of the ruins of Iron Lock sinking river. He then leaped over the wide river and landed on another iron pillar on the opposite bank with his sword in hand. His figure was so fast that even Wang Xianji, who had truly become invincible in the world, couldn't help but look at him in a new light. In terms of lightness skill, the Taoist's ability to cross the river with a single step was already far beyond the description of leaving no trace on the snow. However, the Taoist didn't stop there. When the Taoist stopped his feet, the fist aura was cut in half without any warning and disappeared in an instant. If it was Song Nianqing who used the 14 new swords, he wouldn't be able to kill Xianyuan Qingfeng so cleanly. Even if the fist aura was cut in half, Wang Xianji's fist aura could still use the first half to smash Xianyuan Qingfeng to death instead of disappearing into thin air. Wang Xianji stood proudly at the top of the cliff. She immediately guessed the identity of the Taoist who practiced the sword. The sword maniac Wang Xiaoping had always been known for his pure heart of the sword. It was said that this person never had a fixed position when practicing the sword. Wudong's 81 peaks were all facing the peak. Some were far and some were close. Wang Xiaoping always stood on a peak and pointed his sword at another peak. On the peak, there were brothers who casually threw a fallen leaf. Wang Xianji used to wait for the top martial artists in the world to enter the city and climb the tower in Donghai. There were only a handful of people who waited but didn't see them. Wang Xiaoping was one of them. Wang Xianji was very curious about whether this Taoist, who carried Wudong's way of the sword, could surpass Dongtai's unparalleled murderous aura. Wang Xianji was not angered by Wang Xiaoping's sudden appearance today and the fact that she had shattered his fist aura without even drawing her sword. He was not angered to the point where he wanted to beat a drowning dog out of humiliation and let Xianyuan Qingfeng, who had barely escaped with his life, fall into the water and ignore him. Even if she had profited from the disaster and passed that hurdle, and her future achievements in the martial arts world had reached unreachable heights, it was no longer something Wang Xianji cared about. Wang Xianji only wanted to experience Wang Xiaoping's next move. Wang Xiaoping stood on the shore with an ordinary Taoist peachwood sword in her hand. She looked up at the old man. Ever since this old man defeated Li Chungang, he didn't have a worthy opponent. In the hearts of all Wang Xiaoping's sword practitioners, this was an indescribable feeling of depression. This was because Wang Xianji stepped on the head of the way of the sword to reach the top of the Jianghu. The prosperity of the sword forest had always been known to occupy half of the Jianghu. After Li Chungang lost, even the new god of sword Dongtai couldn't pull Wang Xianji down from his pedestal. The great grandmaster of the way of the sword, the former owner of the Wu family's sword tomb Su of Gozhouzian, Dongyue's sword pool Song Nianqing, also couldn't express his feelings with a single move. As long as Wang Xianji was alive, swordsmen wouldn't be able to raise their heads. How could they talk about a single move? Wang Xiaoping had been practicing swordsmanship since she was young. She wanted to ask Wang Xianji in Jianwu Imperial City one day. She wanted to ask Wang Xianji, who once said, "I see all the swordsmen in the world as if they are nothing." Wang Xianji said loudly, "Wang Xiaoping, before this old man enters Bailiang, he can only wait for 3 moves from you." Chapter 1086. Wang Xiaoping did not reply loudly. She retracted her gaze and looked at the mahogany sword in her hand. she said softly. One sword is enough. Wang Xianji did not travel fast on her way to Beiliang this time. If she traveled too fast, the long-awaited battle would become meaningless. However, she could not travel too slowly either. When the young woman surnamed Jiang forcefully opened the gate of heaven, Wang Xianji did not take it to heart at all. However, if it was Su who did it, it would be hard to say. Huang Longshi, the devil who wished for the world to be in chaos, transferred the remaining fate of the 8 fallen countries to Jianghu. All kinds of opportunities appeared one after another and chaos occurred. Martial arts geniuses such as Chao Chongqing, Dong Tai, and Chun Jibao came out one after another. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a once-in-a-lifetime event. In the end, they were like bamboo shoots after a rain in the same spring. They did not care if there would be no harvest in the coming year. It should be known that many things were divided into big and small years. If the big year was too big, the small year would be too small. Among this large batch of bamboo shoots, the young man surnamed Su was undoubtedly a rising star. However, his position was right below Wang Xianji, the evergreen bamboo. In fact, Shenyuan Qingfeng's defeat was not as unjust as he thought. For so many years, only Dong Tai's flying sword, Chao Chongqing's sleeve, Gu Jiantong's thunder core, the young Song Yanqing's sword chi at the end of its flight, and the 9 yellow sword formation before his death were able to get close to Wang Xianji. Could be said that there were very few people who could get close to Wang Xianji. Of course, the most recent one was the young lord's fist. Wang Xiaoping suddenly raised her head and smiled. Wang Xianji, why are you standing so high up? After that, Wang Xiaoping slightly raised her left arm that was holding the sword. She twisted her wrist and pointed the end of the mahogany scabbard at the gorge wall. Her right hand gently patted the hilt of the sword. The sword in her hand was one of the dozens of mahogany swords that were newly made this summer. Because it was not the best mahogany from Feiqing, the color was only slightly copper, not to mention the pleasant smell of the wood. After she lived with the useless monk Lu Songtao, the nearby villagers had heard that mahogany could ward off evil spirits. However, they did not dare to carve their own swords. It was not easy to find a traveling Taoist. At first, a fisherman asked Wang Xiaoping for a mahogany sword. Later, word spread and people came to visit. Wang Xiaoping. She did not refuse and agreed to give them all. However, she still owed 8 swords. Owed 8 swords. Mahogany swords were made of mahogany wood. Almost everyone on Mount Wudong had a mahogany sword. Before going down the mountain, Wang Xiaoping carried the talisman sword Shinshu, which made her an oddity. She remembered that when she first went down the mountain, her junior apprentice brother Hong Shixiang sent her to the Mountain Gates Memorial Archway. She smiled and said that she helped her senior apprentice brother Wang carve half a mahogany sword. At that time, Wang Xiaoping went down the mountain with a sword. Why would she care about a mahogany sword that was within her reach? The end of the mahogany sword, after a pat, gently tilted up. Rise. Wang Xiaoping softly said a word. After a moment of silence, there was a series of continuous rumbling sounds. The gorge wall under Wang Xianji's feet, from bottom to top, was like a mountain-splitting sword, cutting the mountain from the middle. The cliff was split into 2 halves. Rocks continuously rolled into the river, stirring up thousands of waves. The rise of the sword is already so bold. It seems that you want to learn from Li Chuangong's unsheathing? Since you are only willing to use one sword, this old man will do as you wish. Wang Xianji smiled and lightly jumped down the cliff. His falling speed was not too fast. When his feet landed on the water, there was a huge rock that split out from the mountain. Wang Xianji stretched out his palm and held the heavy rock that was several people's height. He stepped on the river towards Wang Xiaoping. He lifted the huge rock with one hand, but on the river surface under Wang Xianji's feet, there were only circles of almost invisible ripples. Wang Xiaoping looked at the strange scene of the rolling rock on the river surface. For some reason, he thought of his senior apprentice brother's finger cutting off the Zhonglan River. It was not to show off the mystical abilities of the immortals on the mountain in front of the people. It was because of the sudden torrential rain. A few fairies swayed in the wind and rain. Only then did his senior apprentice brother stop the turbulent river water upstream until the ferries safely reached the shore. In the past on the mountain, he, Wang Xiaoping, was the most diligent and obsessed with martial arts among his senior apprentice brothers. He always felt that his senior apprentice brothers did not take cultivation seriously. It was fine if they did not pursue immortality, but they did not care about the 4 words, Wudong will prosper. His senior apprentice brother Wang Zhongluo always said that there was no hurry, and that junior apprentice brother Hong, who called him Little Wang's senior apprentice brother, he always felt a little angry and resentful. But when he heard that his junior apprentice brother had really left the mountain one day, Wang Xiaoping felt that it would be better if his junior apprentice brother stayed on the mountain for the rest of his life to cultivate that unattainable Tao. Wang Xiaoping completely forgot about himself, as if he did not see that Wang Xianji was already rushing over with the huge rock. Wang Xiaoping smiled knowingly. He remembered that when he was young, the sect leader Wang Zhongluo, who was both his senior apprentice brother and a loving father, always liked to throw a child high into the sky, and then hug him with a smile and say, "Catch!" He remembered sitting on his senior apprentice brother Song Jiming's neck, and going to the top of Big Lotus Peak to watch the sunset together. He remembered that when he was young, he defeated his senior apprentice brother Chun Yao, who was once said by his master to be the most competitive, but senior apprentice brother Chun Yao did not feel any disappointment. He just turned his back and left. Afterwards, he heard that senior apprentice brother Chun was grinning from ear to ear. He remembered that every time his senior apprentice brother Yu Xingrui went down the mountain, he would always go to the purple bamboo forest to find him to chat about some interesting stories down the mountain, regardless of whether or not he was impatient. Wang Xiaoping returned to his normal sword-wielding posture, at the same time taking a step back with his right foot, his right hand grasping the peach-wood sword's hilt. He slowly closed his eyes. The side of the Guangling River where the middle-aged Taoist stood, the river water slapped against the shore and receded. The iron pillar behind him that used to block the river began to shake violently, the foundation of the platform beginning to crack inch by inch. Wang Xiaoping only thought of 4 words. Wudong has a sword. Chapter 1087. In Wang Xianji's opinion, the saying that the martial arts of Jianghu were extensive and profound was rather boring. The old man had seen too many so-called supreme arts and new moves, but they were nothing more than old wine in a new bottle. It was difficult for them to escape the rules set by their predecessors, especially for swordsmen. The peaks of their predecessors were too high, and most of the later generations were only on their way up the mountain. Therefore, during this period of time, there was nothing new to speak of, and it was even more difficult for Wang Xianji's eyes to light up. However, Wang Xianji did not let his guard down in the slightest when Wang Xiaoping's half-sword was unsheathed. He originally wanted to use the method he used to deal with the woman from Mount Hui. He wanted to use his unparalleled aura to casually attack from afar. In the end, Wang Xianji, who was holding the mountain with his palm, did not do as he pleased. Instead of holding the rock with one palm, he held it with both hands. His footsteps did not stop as he continued to run towards Wang Xiaoping on the shore. His fingers were like iron hooks, and his chi dynamic seeped into the huge rock. First, it tore open cracks, and then the entire 10,000-pound rock was crushed into hundreds and thousands of pieces of broken stone. The broken stone was scattered, but its spirit did not disperse. Wang Xianji's wrists were pressed together, and with a twist of his hands, the broken stones that looked like they were about to fall apart instantly reformed, forming a large circular stone formation from afar. Between the cracks of the broken stones, countless tiny purple lightning bolts flowed wildly. As Wang Xianji suddenly spread out his hands, a flock of purple and black crows in the shape of a half-fan appeared above the old man's head. The flock of broken stone crows did not stay still, but each of them was drawing water. The Guangling River under Wang Xianji's feet constantly had water columns as thick as an arm surging out of the water surface. If the flock of crows was the fan, then these rapidly rising and spinning water columns were the ribs of the fan. Wang Xiaoping went down Mount Wudong to hone his swordsmanship. Today, he challenged the mountain with his sword and forced Wang Xianji to leave the mountain. However, an outsider came. He could also be considered as someone who had left the mountain. However, The timing of his appearance was coincidental with the rise of Wang Xiaoping's sword and Wang Xinji's flock of crows. It was neither beneficial nor detrimental to the overall situation, so the two of them intentionally chose to ignore this person. This uninvited guest was wearing an old Taoist robe that had been washed until it was white, but it was not the style of Mount Longhu and Mount Wudong. He looked like a man of no doubt about his age. He was about a mile away from the Guangling River and happened to see Wang Xinji's white fist aura smashing towards a man in purple. The middle-aged Taoist did not seem to be running wildly. Every step he took was still leisurely and leisurely. However, in almost the blink of an eye, he was already near the riverbank. Even when Wang Xiaoping slashed the long rainbow with her sword, the Taoist still did not make a move. Then, he stopped at the riverbank and watched the Mount Huishan purple robe fall into the rolling water in the middle of the river. The Taoist seemed to sigh softly. The middle-aged Taoist did not jump into the river to save Wang Xinji. He turned his head and looked at the fan that Wang Xinji had created with great effort. He frowned. Everyone knew that when old monster Wang was in charge of the martial emperor city, he welcomed and sent away countless masters. He never asked for any fancy moves. In short, if you fought with him, it would be ugly. Whether you were Chao Chongqing, who had the 8 stars of elegance to himself, or the peach blossom sword deity who defeated the sword manipulation to the sword manipulation, they would not give the outsiders the impression that the world would cry for ghosts and gods. The Taoist did not move at all. His left hand drew an arc, bringing about waves of ripples, as if he was blocking something invisible. However, the 5 fingers of his right hand were making gestures so fast that it was dazzling. There were 3 situations: the right time, the right place, and the right people. Beimang's grand preceptor Yuan Qingshan was good at calculating the right people. Huang Longshi was especially good at calculating the right time, and he won by calculating the right place. Among the few remaining spring and autumn 13 ranks, this Taoist who had been hiding his scholarly achievements from the beginning to the end occupied the first rank. He seemed to be in his 40s, but in fact he was already over 100 years old. However, the way he practiced made it impossible for him to reach the celestial being realm. Otherwise, with his outstanding talent and wisdom, he could have returned to his original state long ago. His degree of freedom could be compared to Ancestor Lu, who passed through the gate of heaven without entering it 500 years ago. However, whether the people could ascend or not was just a matter of a thought from him. In the long years, he had seen too many ups and downs of the world. He had discussed the Tao with Ancestor Lu's reincarnation, Qi Xian, many times. He had raised an evil dragon for the Zhao family of Liang in the Earth Lung Mountain, and schemed against the 3rd generation of the Dragon Tiger Mountain's chief. Earlier, he had even walked Jianghu with Lu Songtao, the sect leader of Zhulu Mountain, who was invincible in the world 100 years ago. They were both enemies and friends. The Taoist stopped making gestures. He already understood the situation of the 2 people in the distance. Chapter 1088. Wang Xinji was close to 100 years old. He had been at the peak of martial arts for nearly 60 years. Compared to ordinary people, he had lived for a long time. Almost everyone had forgotten that this burly old man was once a scholar with aspirations in the imperial court. He had imitated those famous scholars and used a feather fan to point out the country. However, due to various reasons, he abandoned his books and entered the Jianghu. Since then, he had never looked back. When the devil Huang Sanjia guided the fate of the nation into the Jianghu, Wang Xinji was originally at the top. He was similar to a powerful official in the imperial court who held the emperor and ordered his vassals. No one could compete with him. He could have taken most of it for himself and become like Gao Shulu from 400 years ago and Lu Songtao from 100 years ago. However, Wang Xinji did not do so. Be it the fearless Song Nianqing or Chao Chongqing who had just entered the celestial phenomenon realm, none of them died in Martial Emperor City. When he left the Eastern Sea, he could kill or not kill Shen Yuan Qingfeng. However, Wang Xiaoping was different. The latter had the Wudong Mountain behind him. In the future, the people on the mountain would face the fishing immortal. In the end, it would create a new situation that had not been seen in 1,000 years. In the future, not to mention the grand occasion of 7 or 8 Earth immortals appearing at the same time, none of them would be left. Even the celestial phenomenon realm would be an extravagant hope. Naturally, the word ascension would be lost. Wang Xianji, who had divided the territory with his own strength, naturally hated this situation. Not only did Wang Xianji want to block Wang Xiaoping's next sword, he also wanted to cut off the relationship between the sword maniac and the Wudong Mountain. Wang Xianji clenched his fists and threw them forward. The fan pounced forward with an earth-shattering momentum, stirring up a strong wind. Wang Xiaoping's eyes were still closed. He put 2 fingers on his left hand together and pushed forward on the peachwood scabbard. The scabbard gently slid out. There was no unparalleled aura qi, nor was there any strange phenomenon. Even if the rubble with purple lightning rolled towards him, followed by a huge wave, the speed of the sword being unsheathed was still neither fast nor slow. What happened next shocked the world. The Wudong Taoist was struck by the earth-shattering thunder and lightning that blotted out the sky, and then a huge wave crashed onto his head. After this round of attack, countless broken stones did not fall to the ground as expected. Instead, they floated on the shore and rotated slowly. When the sky was covered by dark clouds, a long and translucent white line appeared. It was faintly discernible, as if it was hanging down from the 9th heaven. It was slightly slanted and pointed at Wang Xiaoping, whose peachwood sword had not been completely unsheathed. The end of the white line hung 3 feet above the Taoist's head. As the saying goes, God is watching you from 3 feet above your head. It means that God always remembers the good and evil of people. Wang Xianji sneered. She stretched out her finger and snapped the fishing line. The middle-aged Taoist muttered to himself, "In the end, Li Chungang can lose to Wang Xianji, and you can also lose to a rising star. But Jianghu can't be lifeless. Why is it that Confucianism can't change the law because of literature, but chivalry can't break the law because of martial arts?" The Taoist sighed. Su Fengyan of Beiliang wants to guard the northwest door and give the people of the Central Plains a stable place. His original intention is not bad, but he is too deeply involved with Wudong. Once he gains power, he will definitely join hands with Li Yufu. Therefore, there are 2 choices. If you don't kill Su Fengyan, the world will be less turbulent for decades. If you kill Su Fengyan, Jianghu will still be Jianghu. No matter how strong the imperial court is, they can generally stay out of each other's business. Now, someone may want to fill up the well of Jianghu. As a frog in the well, it is reasonable that you, Wang Xianji, don't agree. When he saw that the tight white line above Wang Xiaoping's head seemed to be cut suddenly, the remaining white line fiercely bounced in the air in an arc and finally slowly dissipated in the clouds. Wang Xiaoping still did not draw his sword. His fingers were close to the tip of the sword, which meant that the scabbard was about to completely leave the sword. The Taoist didn't know whether it was because he was a fellow cultivator or because he felt sympathy for him. He couldn't bear to watch and turned to look at the river. In reality, if Wang Xiaoping had attacked earlier, just to break Wang Xianji's cage, then he would have been more alive than dead. With Wang Xianji's temperament of rarely getting angry, she might not necessarily want to kill him. But since this sword maniac was stubborn, Wang Xianji should really want to kill him. The Taoist was a solitary hermit. He understood Wang Xiaoping's persistence, but it was difficult to agree. Even if it was a sword of an earth immortal, so what? To say the least, even if he could really hurt Wang Xianji, it would only show the young vassal king a flaw that could only be regarded as insignificant. It would not stop Wang Xianji from killing people. Was it worth it to use one's life in exchange for a little more chance of victory? The Taoist suddenly opened his eyes wide. Even though he was an old monster who had been called a 1,000-year-old tortoise by Su Fengyan, he was still shocked. Wang Xiaoping opened his eyes. When the scabbard was about to fall, he didn't draw his sword. Instead, he pushed the sword back into the scabbard and said softly, "Go!" The peachwood sword still in the scabbard flashed. Many passengers on the ferries going to and from the gorge screamed at the same time. It turned out that the boats under their feet were beginning to lose control. No matter how hard they tried, they began to retreat quickly. The boats with their bows facing downstream seemed to have the help of God, rushing downwards like arrows. All of this was because the Guangling River, with Wang Xiaoping and the end of the gorge as the boundary line, was suddenly pulled away. The river water that left the waterway was as thick as a mountain peak. It rose into the air like an unprecedented blue sword, curved around Wang Xiaoping, and then straightened in the air in a flash. The tip of the sword pointed directly at Wang Xianji, who was floating in the air without the river water under his feet. Wang Xiaoping shouted softly and took a step forward. He finally drew his sword, a section of the river water as a sword. Chapter 1089. The Taoist looked at the sword from the other side of the river and sighed in amazement. The sword intent and sword chi of Wang Xiaoping's sword was enough to be called the pinnacle of swordsmen. It could no longer be simply called a talisman sword or a sword technique. There was a very important reason why generations of swordsmen were able to rise and fall in the martial arts world. Sword masters, when they felt like it, could often ignore realms. A second-grade master might be able to reach finger mystery with one sword, while a finger mystery swordsman could reach celestial phenomenon with one sword. They could even break through bottlenecks and directly reach the level of a land immortal. The green dragon was 100 feet long and floated beside Wang Xiaoping. It was as if Wang Xiaoping was carrying a sword on his shoulder. Following this Taoist priest of Mount Wudong, who had profound knowledge, dug out a section of the river. The tilted boats on the river followed the water flow into the Guangling waterway. It just so happened that they could see this soul-stirring scene. Each and every one of their hearts swayed. Probably because Wang Xiaoping's spirit was very upright and peaceful. The spectators were amazed but not afraid. As the surging river once again filled up the waterway, the passengers on the ferry could take the opportunity to see the graceful bearing of the immortals. Some of the ferrymen who were originally rushing upstream also took out their silver and desperately asked the ferry owner to turn the boat around and follow the river. The reason why they were not afraid of being affected was because they noticed that the sword tip had started to move towards the shore. The hemp-clothed old man who was originally standing on the river also jumped onto the shore and changed the battlefield. When Wang Xianji's foot touched the ground, the green sword had already rushed over. The distance between the man and the sword was less than 30 feet. Wang Xianji's foot touched the ground and the other foot touched the ground one step behind. He did not dodge and directly punched out. The huge green sword suddenly stopped 3 feet away and exploded into a dazzling splash of water. Then it turned into mist and disappeared. The water curtain created by the collision of the fist aura and the sword chi seemed to have no end. This 100-feet water sword was severely damaged. It was shrinking at a speed that the passengers on the river could see with their naked eyes. Very quickly, it consumed 10 feet of the sword body. Wang Xianji's figure remained motionless, but it seemed that her patience had been worn out. Very soon, she was no longer willing to stand there and be beaten. She took a step forward, and her left hand swung out a fist. The power of this fist was unparalleled. Not only did it smash the new sword tips that came one after another, it was actually able to smash the entire green sword, causing it to sway incessantly. Countless thin and mixed sword chi, hidden in the green water sword, started to shoot out in all directions. It was a magnificent sight. After that, the old man who had been roughly guessed by the passengers to be the owner of the martial emperor city stepped forward and punched out. He did not retreat but advanced instead. He hit the sword from 90 feet to 80 feet, 70 feet, and when half of the sword reached 50 feet, Wang Xianji slightly stopped attacking. Just like martial arts, if you don't advance, you will fall back. When he stopped, the sword momentum that was originally blocked seemed to be waiting for this moment. It was not just a little bit stronger than before, it was as if there was a gap of a whole realm. Wang Xianji slid back a distance and gently jumped up. He slapped down on the huge sword tip. The sword tip was forced down. The green sword drilled into the ground and tore open a groove. The huge sword made an arc under the ground and drilled out of the ground. The arc continued until the sword body finally formed a big circle. The end of the sword was not far from Wang Xianji's feet. The sword tip fell from the top and pointed at Wang Xianji, who had already turned around. The Taoist who cultivated in seclusion in the Dragon Tiger mountainside. In his eyes, the sword style was like a jade. The general principle was that the outside was like the sky and the inside was like the earth. Previously, the sword was in the Vajra realm. The sword that cut off the river was in the mysterious finger realm. Now that the sword was half out of the sheath, it could be considered the spirit of the Tianxiang sword. Within the big circle there was sword chi. In fact, all three belonged to one sword. What was more rare was that this unfinished sword did not show any signs of decline. The spirit was still rising. Even Wang Xianji could not stop it at the node of the mysterious finger celestial phenomenon. In the past 60 years, Wang Xianji almost never used a higher realm to crush anyone. He always liked to fight with people of the same realm. He wanted to exhaust his opponent's moves and spirit. Even if he lost to him, he would have no regrets. Therefore, he held back his fist momentum because he knew in advance that Wang Xiaoping's sword had an instantaneous ascension. At this moment, facing the round jade sword that was full of spirit, Wang Xianji lowered his hands and raised them. He took the opportunity to lift the purple and green upstanding qi and used them as blades and swords respectively. The Taoist laughed softly. It's not common to see Wang Xianji pick up a weapon to face the enemy. Wang Xianji, who had a strong body to begin with, suddenly became even more arrogant. He was like a deity from the heavenly court who had descended to the world. However, Wang Xianji did not use any complicated or ingenious moves. He only used a horizontal blade and a vertical sword. The horizontal blade cut through the jade wall and the vertical sword cut through Qing Shui. It was as if a priceless piece of jade wall was smashed onto the cold hard ground. The scene was extremely dazzling. Chapter 1090. The situation changed so quickly that even the Taoist cultivating on Mount Longhu was dazzled. When he focused his gaze again, he saw that the 500 feet long green half-sword had already been shattered. The Taoist originally thought that Wang Xiaoping's Tianxiang half-sword was already the peak, but he soon realized that he had underestimated this Wudong sword maniac who had left the mountain for many years. Wudong's prosperity lay in the fact that one mountain shouldered two Taos, the Tao of Heaven and the Tao of Martial Arts. The previous generation's leader Hong Shixiang had almost achieved both. It was just that he had left the mountain in too much of a hurry, and he had left the world in even more of a hurry. Therefore, Wang Xiaoping at the very least had to shoulder a sword. The Taoist had been living in Mount Longhu, the ancestral court of Taoism, for so many years. He always felt that Mount Wudong was too human, and the immortal qi that cultivators worked hard to find was inevitably inferior to the Taoist master mansion that was surrounded by immortal qi all year round. However, the last half of Wang Xiaoping's sword had slightly changed the old Taoist's opinion. Wudong has 81 peaks. Around Wang Xianji, there were 81 swords of different lengths and thicknesses. The tips of the swords all pointed towards the sky at the same time. The tips of the swords were either perfectly straight or slightly tilted. The Lingxi sword momentum and the lofty mountain momentum completely matched each other. So much so that the Taoist who was watching from afar could easily identify the names of the mountains that each of the 81 swords symbolized. Wang Xianji chuckled softly. Whether it was Qi Xuanjin, who sat high on the demon execution platform, or Hong Shixiang, who rode a crane down to Jiangnan, none of them had lowered themselves to the same level as Wang Xianji. But he couldn't help but feel regret. He once had a move that he had studied for many years. At first, he wanted to target Qi Xuanjin, but later, Qi Xuanjin was said to have ascended to immortality. Then, with great difficulty, there was a descendant of Wudong who could suppress Mount Longhu with a sword. Wang Xianji picked up that move again and continued to silently investigate and fix the flaws. But once again, he was disappointed. In the end, he never had the opportunity to make a move. Since Wang Xiaoping did not disappoint her, Wang Xianji no longer deliberately restrained herself. She bent her knees slightly and assumed the role of an overlord, lifting mountains and rivers. When the 81 swords flew over the top, a gorge wall that was far more magnificent than the boulder was also forcibly uprooted. The raging waves shook the earth and the mountains. Everyone in the world mistakenly thought that the ability to move mountains and drain seas was just an absurd legend in those supernatural novels. At this time, the ferry passengers on the river saw it with their own eyes. They were scared to death. Many of them knelt on the bow of the boat, not daring to look at the flying mountain that covered the sky. One mountain suppressing 81 peaks. What was even more unbelievable was that Wang Xianji herself was also within the range of the flying mountain. It was obvious that Wang Xianji wanted to use this to suppress Wang Xiaoping. This old man had moved a mountain here. If Wang Xiaoping couldn't even break through the mountain, how could she compete with Wang Xianji? A cliff came crashing down. Dust filled the air on this side of the Guangling River. That deafening sound was ear-piercing. Wang Xiaoping dug out a section of the great river's water and made a one-of-a-kind big sword in the world. But that wooden sword, whose whereabouts were unknown, was the real root. The peachwood sword was originally the Taoist's house-guarding spirit weapon, yet Wang Xianji unexpectedly used the mountain as a sword. It was undoubtedly a great provocation to Wudong Mountain, where Lu Zhu had attained the Tao. Wang Xiaoping's sword was a new sword, and Wang Xianji's mountain was also a new mountain. On the peak of the new mountain, there was a very old white-haired old man in Jianghu. His hemp clothes were not stained with dust, and he stood with his hands behind his back. That half a move of the new sword did not disappear just like that. Instead, it broke through the mountain. Only one sword remained from the 81 swords. The water sword was no more than 3 feet long, but the sword qi was 10 feet long. From the 100 feet long Qing sword, the remaining 10 feet of sword qi was 10 feet long. Wang Xiaoping seemed to be defeated repeatedly, but in the eyes of the old Taoist who had profound cultivation, it was not easy for Wang Xianji, who was standing on the peak of the mountain, to win. The coarse hemp sleeves were already in tatters. Previously, when he bent his knees to move the mountain, it should be because he could not care too much about the minor details. His vigorous qi leaked out, and the coarse hemp around his knees also became slightly loose. The Taoist looked at the narrow but long flying sword outside the mountain, and there was some fear in his eyes. An eye for an eye, as expected of the most stubborn sword maniac on Wudong Mountain. You, Wang Xianji, used the flying mountain as a sword. I, Wang Xiaoping, used my flying sword to take your head. The last 10 miles were the most difficult, especially when climbing a mountain. To completely break Wang Xiaoping's complete sword was like climbing a mountain, and the further one went, the harder it was. It was the same for the sword. The person who made the move. Was he thinking of returning to the mountain for the last time to see his old friend? The Taoist sighed. Was this the sword heart that Wang Xiaoping had comprehended in the end? The sword heart that he had been pursuing all his life? Dragon Tiger Mountain had ascended Jinren in the past, and in the past 300 years its reputation had far surpassed Wudong, but it seemed that there had never been such a sword. The old Taoist's eyelids trembled involuntarily. The sword was out. Wang Xianji roared angrily and faced it head-on. On the peak of the mountain that was on the verge of collapse, a huge pit was formed with each step. Every step he took caused the mountain to fall several feet, breaking the sword qi, and pushed his palm on the tip of the sword. A person could die, but the sword could be destroyed. A man of 7 feet had a 3-foot sword. A person and a sword were still one. He could not retreat. The sword qi, sword intent, and sword edge were all destroyed inch by inch. Wang Xianji's steps also became extremely slow. His tall body and palm could only move forward inch by inch. A hole was made in his palm. When the number 1 person in the world finally broke the 3-foot sword in an unparalleled manner, not only was his palm badly mutilated, but there was also a trace of sword qi that pierced his chest and caused a scarlet blood flower. The sword qi dissipated behind Wang Xianji. The sword had already pierced through Wang Xianji. The old Taoist who had the same surname as the son of the Zhao family sighed heavily. Wang Xiaoping had a sword when he was alive, and it could be said that he did not let down his sword in this life. The Taoist's eyes suddenly widened, and he was greatly shocked as he looked at the shore. Wang Xiaoping had died long ago. Almost no one noticed that when the sword was in Mount Feishing, there was already a flash of light in the sky. It seemed to be returning to the mountain on behalf of someone. At that time, the middle-aged Taoist with the highest seniority in Wudong was sitting cross-legged, looking at the river. His face was haggard, but his expression was peaceful. His warm smile had never been shown in those years on the mountain. Little junior brother, I can't wait for you to come home. Wang Xiaoping closed his eyes, not looking at his last sword at all. Therefore, that sword was the sword of Wang Xiaoping, who had regrets but no regrets after his death. Chapter 1091. Outside the mouth of the gorge was a battle of the peak of martial arts in the world. Dozens of miles upstream of the battlefield on the bank of the Guangling River, there was only a muddle-headed monk left in the thatched cottage without the Taoist who still owed the villagers a dozen peach-wood swords. When Wang Xiaoping passed away quietly with her hands folded on her knees, the mad monk also took off the tattered kasaya that had accompanied him all the way from Mount Lantua and changed into clean clothes that he had asked Wang Xiaoping to buy from the market 2 days ago. The middle-aged Taoist, who had always been serious, even made an exception and joked that he didn't need to return the money to collect the corpse. The monk touched his bald head and then stretched out his hand to pluck a reed leaf from the reeds on the bank of the river. He stepped on the surface of the river and gently stepped on the reed. A reed went into the river. A few ships went against the current, and before the first wave had subsided, another wave rose. They had just witnessed the hardy battle between the two immortals, and now they happened to see this scene. They were a little shocked to the point of numbness. They were all wondering what kind of great luck they had bumped into today. It was simply as if immortals had appeared in large numbers. However, all of them had appeared in such a way. Could it be that the reclusive masters were so worthless? The reed leaf went out of the gorge and floated to the center of the river. The useless monk, who was no longer wearing the kasaya, looked left and right. He first looked at Wang Xiaoping and then the old Taoist. With a calm expression, he took a step forward and quickly sank to the bottom of the river. At the bottom of the Guangling River, the water was muddy and the light was dim. Looking for people and things was no different from looking for a needle in a haystack. However, he still accurately landed a few feet away from the purple-clothed woman. The 6 senses and 7 apertures of the woman of Mount Hui were all sealed. Her delicate body was curled up like a baby in the womb, and the heaven and earth were her parents. Lu Songtao stared at the woman in a daze. The old Taoist on the shore, who had stubbornly cultivated in seclusion, had left Mount Longhu because he wanted to see her face before she died. Going forward, the reason why he cultivated in Mount Longhu was also an unspeakable secret that very few people knew about. 100 years ago, the 3 of them traveled the Jianghu hand in hand. He was not yet a monk of Mount Lantua, but the 9th cult master of Mount Julu. Among all the cult masters of the devil cult, he was the most unlike the cult master of Mount Julu. And that Taoist was not the current resident of Longhu Mountain. He was the 4th prince of the Liang royal family, who was recognized as better than the crown prince. His achievements, knowledge, martial arts, and talent were all outstanding. As for the delicate and naive woman who ended up with an extremely miserable life, she did not have a country-toppling beauty, nor did she have an insufferably arrogant background. However, Lu Songtao, who had concealed his identity and traveled in Jianghu, just happened to fall in love with her. Yet, she fell in love with that handsome child named Zhao Huangchao. Lu Songtao did not mind this. With the 2 of them traveling together, where in the world could she not go? During this period of time, Lu Songtao didn't feel sad as he watched the woman he loved smile sweetly at other men. But when he returned to Mount Julu and came out of closed-door meditation, he heard the grievous news that Zhao Huangchao had single-handedly caused. He silently went down the mountain. Just like today, he also helped to collect the body, put on clothes for her, and carried her back to the mountain. Lu Songtao went down the mountain for the last time. He killed countless famous Jianghu figures who were fishing for fame, as well as countless high-ranking princes, dukes, and famous ministers. After killing them, every time he turned around, he always felt that she was standing there and smiling. Lu Songtao looked at the woman in purple who was both her and not her, and his tears kept flowing. Lu Songtao stretched out his hand, trying to grab the corner of the big purple dress that was gently floating at the bottom of the river. Then he slowly withdrew his hand and his body began to float up. He broke through the water surface and lightly touched the water surface, laughing loudly and singing loudly. The surface of the river was like the surface of a drum, thumping loudly. Heaven and earth are useless. They don't enter my eyes. Sun and moon are useless. They can't exist together. Kunlun is useless. They can't come to me. Compassion is useless. They are sanctimonious. Tranquility is useless. Their sleeves are empty. Great river is useless. They go east and never return. Wind and snow are useless. They can't fill their stomachs. Grass is useless. They wither with each passing year. Karma is useless. They are all fixed. Jianghu is useless. We forget each other. Lu Songtao lowered his head and chanted like a Buddhist monk, like a madman singing a sad song. He swept to the shore and lowered his head to stare at the Wudong sword maniac who was smiling as he went to his death. He restrained his arrogant and domineering attitude and moved his lips slightly. He put his palms together and chanted sutras to send the swordsman off. Lu Songtao opened his eyes and looked around. Then he looked at the sky and laughed loudly. Meditation is useless. How can you become a Buddha? At the same time, Lu Songtao's shoulders shook and his pale face flashed away. Then he glowed with a kind of purple-gold color that only eminent monks who had attained Bodhi in the Buddhist scriptures would have. That shake of his shoulders made this Zulu mountain cult leader seem like he wanted to shake off a heavy burden that he had been carrying for a long time. The old Taoist Zhao Huangchao narrowed his eyes and his face was gloomy. He had already calculated that Wang Xiaoping's Peachwood sword, which had been ready but not released, seemed to be carrying a heavy burden and would be sent west to Wudong Mountain in Bailiang. Lu Songtao, who had hidden in Mount Lantuo for 100 years, also wanted to get involved in this mess? Zhao Huangchao was hesitant. In the end, he still did not immediately stop Lu Songtao from shaking off the invisible object. Before Lu Songtao moved forward, he looked back at Zhao Huangchao, who had been entangled with grievances for 100 years. The two of them looked at each other. Lu Songtao sneered. You are even inferior to a woman. It was like this 100 years ago, and it is even more so 100 years later. Old thief Zhao, why don't you die? Zhao Huangchao, who had once gone out of his body and rode a dragon to Mount Kuanglu, was silent. Chapter 1092. Back then, Lu Songtao went on a killing spree and swept through the court like a hot knife through butter. It was Zhao Huangchao who half begged and half forced the Taoist master of Longhu Mountain to set up a sacrificial altar and ask the 3 modern grandmasters to kill him with a 10,000 Li Sky Thunder nail. Although they didn't kill Lu Songtao, they succeeded in making this devil cult leader silent for 100 years. Lu Songtao no longer paid attention to this old ancestor that the current Zhao family's son knew but didn't dare to admit. He ran wildly to catch up with Wang Xianji, who was walking on the shore. He walked out of Mount Lantuo and came to the Jianghu of the Central Plains. Li Dongxin of the two Zen temples blocked his way, White Dress Luoyang blocked his way, Zhao Ningxin, the reincarnation of the first grandmaster of Longhu Mountain, blocked his way, and countless top heroes of Jianghu blocked his way. This time, he was going to block someone else's way. Wang Xianji still walked at a steady pace. Lu Songtao quickly caught up with this city master of Martial Emperor City who was 40 years younger than him. They seemed to be walking side by side, but Lu Songtao was actually flying with the wind and his feet didn't touch the ground. Wang Xianji didn't turn his head and said calmly, "Things are different now. 100 years ago, Lu Songtao was the undisputed #1 in Jianghu. 100 years later, not to mention someone's sword skills, even the living Dong Tai's sword skills are slightly better than yours. Are you really going to stop me?" Lu Songtao smiled and said, "Isn't it a good thing that Jianghu and Jianghu are compatible with each other?" Wang Xianji didn't comment. Lu Songtao looked into the distance and continued, "As for what you're thinking, you're hoping that the Jianghu under our feet will prosper for 100 years and not die for 1,000 years. It's not that I don't know, but each generation has its own destiny and can't be forced. Just like those lobbyists and roamers in the Qin dynasty, they were all like wandering dogs. Who would have thought that later on, there would be so many powerful clans? They were destined to become a cancer in the eyes of the later generations. What you, Wang Xianji, think is good in others' eyes. You've won the Jianghu of several generations by yourself, and you're still not satisfied? It's not a bad thing to just ascend and be a celestial being in the heavens and let your descendants walk their own path. You may want to say that Li Yufu of Wudong is more superfluous than you, but he is after all a member of the 3 sects and has just entered the secular world. As for Su Fengnian, his identity is even more special. He is very different from you. How can you compare the two of you?" Wang Xianji sneered. "Eating Huang Longshi's leftovers and helping Huang Longshi do evil, is it really reasonable to rely on your identity as a reincarnated celestial?" Wang Xianji doesn't believe in this. "If there's any justice, I'll have to wait until I ascend before I have the mood to listen to it." Lu Songtao smiled and said, "I've heard a lot of rumors about you these days. You're different from me and Gao Shulu from 400 years ago, who killed every expert in the world on sight. Be it good or evil, you rarely kill. It's true that people who walk different paths can't make plans together. Wang Xianji snorted. Su Fengyan has worked hard to accumulate good cultivation. Instead of wasting it under Beimang's iron hooves, it's better to fight with me fair and square. After all, there are still people in Jianghu who remember him as the king of Beiliang. Otherwise, with the Zhao family's bullish *T conduct, not to mention leaving their names in the history books, even the unofficial history books compiled by private people wouldn't dare to mention them. Lu Songtao frowned and asked, "Aren't you worried that once Beimang's iron cavalry breaks through the northwest gate and invades the central plains, how many people will die even if it's only 10 years of war? It won't be much less than the Great War of Spring and Autumn, right?" Wang Xianji said calmly, "What does the separation of the world have to do with me?" Lu Songtao sighed with emotion. Didn't Huang Longsher say that every man is responsible for the rise and fall of the world? Wang Xianji sneered and said, "He's just using his mouth and tongue to say a few good words. If others don't criticize him, do you, Lu Songtao, really think it's useful? If you were on the celestial list 100 years ago, after I ascended, the first thing I would do would be to knock you down to earth." Lu Songtao didn't get angry. After a moment of silence, he was amazed, happy, and admiring. For a moment, all kinds of feelings welled up in his heart. He even forgot to ride the wind and didn't dare to make a sound. He only said in his heart, "I know what you want, Wang Xianji. After I ascended, I, Wang Xianji, will personally guard the divine gate and won't let the celestials interfere with the world. However, the martial artists in the world can still ascend. So you, Li Yufu, are simply drawing legs on a snake." Wang Xianji didn't stop. His words came into Lu Songtao's ears from afar. "Since you've already prepared your power, if you want to block my way, you don't have to care about the sword wound." Lu Songtao silently said the word "good" and floated forward again. He passed Wang Xianji and stopped dozens of feet away from him. He lowered his head and put his palms together. Lu Songtao looked free and easy, as if he was truly relieved of a burden. He said to himself, "Hiding in Mount Lantuo, I can live an ignoble life. After 100 years, I can see the person I miss." It's time for Lu Songtao to be pious and offer a joss stick for the Orthodox Buddhism. Bodhisattva Dharma forms fell from the sky. They stood between Lu Songtao and Wang Xianji. This was Lu Songtao's blocking the road. Falling sword style. After offering a joss stick, the Bodhisattva sword fell. Wang Xiaoping, Lu Songtao, sword immortal after sword immortal. Wang Xianji subconsciously looked up at the sky. He seemed to remember that the only person he owed in his life wasn't there. He then turned to look at the place where someone died. Lu Songtao kept his palms together. Thus, the solemn Dharma forms of the great Bodhisattva Dharma forms filled the sky and landed on earth without stopping. Wang Xianji clenched his fists and crossed them in front of his chest. He took a deep breath. The Dharma forms landed from far to near. They were continuous and became more and more intense. They had already set up an inescapable net around the hemp-clothed elder. Wang Xianji stepped on the left and right side of him. He was already invincible in the world. So what? Chapter 1093. Even though Lu Songtao knew what Wang Xianji was thinking, he still blocked his way. With a falling sword style, countless Bodhisattva Dharma appearances were summoned and trapped Wang Xianji. There were high and low Bodhisattva Dharma appearances. Some were so clear that they could be seen, while others were vague. Among them, there were 4 Bodhisattva Dharma appearances that were the most majestic, guarding the 4 directions. There was Guanyin, who removed the suffering of all living beings, Manjushri, who was pure and untainted, Samantabhadra, who had no intention of turning back, and Ksitigarbha, who wished to become a Buddha after saving all living beings. Among them, Samantabhadra was the most vivid and amiable. It was due to Wang Xiaoping's sword heart that would not back down no matter what. After Wang Xianji stepped on the ground, he abruptly withdrew his fists. With him as the center, an aura that was strong enough to overshadow the surging waves of the martial emperor city gushed out without restraint. Wherever the aura touched, regardless of whether they were on the ground or still in the air, most of them collapsed with a loud bang. Some of them were on the verge of collapse, obviously showing signs of collapsing. Only the 4 bodhisattvas remained motionless. Manjushri even opened his golden mouth slightly, chanting scriptures. Above his head, there were vaguely fairies with long sleeves flying around. Between heaven and earth, golden light overflowed and fluorescent, as if they were in a Buddhist land on the other side. The strongest person in Jianghu 100 years ago met the strongest person in the present. This magnificent battle had indeed reached a level that was not recorded in ancient books and unimaginable by modern people. Wang Xianji did not use his qi to form swords or sabers. His figure turned illusory and punched in all directions. Before the phantoms could merge into one, a snow-white flowing light bypassed Manjushri Dharma appearance and rushed to Lu Songtao, who was meditating. Behind Lu Songtao, an Akalanatha of esoteric sect appeared, looking angry. After being hit by Wang Xianji's body, Lu Songtao's sitting posture did not change at all, but he slid back 100 feet. After another hit, there was a thunderous sound. Lu Songtao, who was sitting on the ground with his palms together, retreated again and again. However, when he and his Dharma appearance were retreating, the Akalanatha let out a muffled roar. If the people were stubborn, they would have been awakened by the roar. If they were stubborn demons, they would have been scared away. Unfortunately, the one who came was Wang Xianji, a warrior who could compete with the immortal Lu Dongxian. For the third strike, Wang Xianji, who was standing, kicked Lu Songtao's forehead. He directly kicked the cult master of the devil cult, who had put down the butcher knife and sat on the ground to cultivate Buddhism for 100 years, into the ground. The Dharma idol of the Akala Wisdom King sank deep into the ground, only revealing the frightened face that was on the verge of collapse. At the same time, the 4 bodhisattvas in the distance turned into fireflies and slowly rose into the sky. Wang Xianji stopped her simple but invincible attack. For the first time, a trace of anger appeared on the old man's face. He asked in a deep voice, "Do you know that someone has a wish?" Lu Songtao, who was still on the ground, stood up, turned around, put his palms together and bowed. He took the initiative to disperse the last Dharma form. Then he slowly walked on the slanted mud road that was as flat as a sword. He stood in front of Wang Xianji, nodded, and replied softly, "I hope that everyone in the younger generation can open the gate of heaven with a sword." Wang Xianji said indifferently, "I'm just an old man who only has Jianghu in my eyes." Lu Songtao thought for a while and said calmly, "You think that the rise and fall of the world is the responsibility of kings, ministers, and scholars. If they do well, they can't bear the burden of peace and prosperity. People in chaos are worse than dogs. Anyway, you, Wang Xianji, only take the burden of martial arts. But what you think, I also have my own thoughts. In the end, it's because our paths are different, so our plans are different. In order to win the world, the 2 dynasties of Liang and Beimang lacked military provisions and money, so they used all kinds of banners to destroy Buddhism. Not only did they let the Taoist priests seal the mountain gate of the 2 Zen temples, but they also destroyed countless temples and scriptures. Not only that, they also tried their best to eradicate the inheritance of Buddhism. Lu Songtao wanted to burn a stick of incense for Buddhism at this time and place. It's not that I, Lu Songtao, want to flatter the young vassal king of Beiliang, but I want to do my best for Buddhism. I want to protect the last pure land as much as possible. Even if it's just to let a monk have a place to stand, it's also a good thing." Wang Xianji waved her hand. "I still have to hurry, so I don't want to waste my breath on you." The purple-gold color on Lu Songtao's face was unstable. He suddenly asked with a smile, "Wang Xianji, how much effort did you put in?" Wang Xianji didn't answer, but asked back, "To stop or not to stop?" Lu Songtao turned sideways and stretched out his hand. "Since I, Lu Songtao of Zhulu Mountain, have no more requests, I've already let go. Besides, taking off the kasaya doesn't mean that I'm no longer a monk. I can't die for the time being. Besides, you may not be able to kill that person." Wang Xianji didn't say anything and brushed past Lu Songtao. In the end, Lu Songtao still didn't know if Wang Xianji had put in all her effort, but he didn't expect it either. It was enough if she had done it. 100 years later, the water level of Jianghu was much higher than before. He came a little late, but at least he wasn't too late. Lu Songtao walked to the shore of Guangling and cupped a handful of murky river water to wash away the bloodstains. He wanted to carry Wudong Wang Xiaoping on his back, but he lost his balance and sat on a pile of wet stones. He sighed and got up with difficulty. He looked to the south. It's a pity that the peach blossom sword god, who I've only heard of but never seen, probably won't come. Lu Songtao endured the stinging pain and rushed to find Wang Xiaoping. He bent down and carried this Wudong Taoist priest who could overlook the sword forest after Dongtai. He straightened his back and said softly, "Gao Shulu's body, your peachwood sword, and my Buddhist fate. Together, the odds of winning are still not high." Lu Songtao smiled bitterly. Is it unfortunate that there's such an old man suppressing Jianghu? Or is it fortunate? It's fine for us, but that vassal king must be very unfortunate. On the other side of the river, Zhao Huangchao was nowhere to be found. At the bottom of the river, the woman who was lucky enough to survive the battle was still there. Lu Songtao stared blankly at the rolling East River, silent. Thinking back to those years, she used to laugh and say that there were partridges in the south of Jiangnan, and that she couldn't do it. Chapter 1094. Lu Songtao closed his eyes and silently chanted Amitabha. After opening his eyes, he strode forward. Wang Xianji's fists were like rainbows, striking the purple clothes of Mount Huishan to the bottom of the river. Then, she blocked the sword of Wang Xiaoping after she died. She even got rid of the demon-turned Buddhist Lu Songtao in one go. In one day, she had fought with 3 top masters in succession without too much trouble. But the indisputable number 1 person in the world, the city lord of Martial Emperor City, was tormented by an unknown girl who did not know when to advance or retreat. The first inexplicable attack happened at the end of the Songxian River, a tributary of the Guangling River. At the time, Wang Xianji was surprised that, before she leapt out of the river, he did not sense any trace of her. The old man was just curious. Towards her vicious hand chop, it was more of a senior's appreciation of the younger generation. He was not angry at all. After dodging, he did not pursue. Watching the girl's figure disappear into the distance, he bent down and left the battlefield. He ran like a fox, extremely fast. The main thing was that she came and went in a hurry, almost not affecting her chi. It was not easy. At the time, Wang Xianji only thought of a rumor that had been widely spread in Martial Emperor City. The former 11th in the world, Wang Mingyin, was killed by a young female assassin's sinister hand chop. At the time, Wang Xianji did not pay much attention to it. Later, when she received a secret that was absolutely true, she remembered this assassin. She took the opportunity to kill the gatekeeper of Great Peace City, the celestial phenomenon expert Liu Haosher. She must be the little girl who came to make the 4th stone. For homophonic death. Little girl, this is not very auspicious. At the beginning, Wang Xianji felt that the girl was quite interesting. If they met, she could chat with her for a while to relieve her boredom. After half a year, they met for the 2nd time. It was on a post road near River Prefecture. Wang Xianji was walking slowly under the shade of a willow tree. A caravan of merchants passed by. When the last rider was about to pass by Wang Xianji, the girl assassin suddenly darted out from under the horse's belly. She ran close to the ground and then leapt up quickly. Again, with a hand chop, she stabbed towards Wang Xianji's heart. Wang Xianji grabbed her wrist and threw her out. Her delicate body smashed through a willow tree that was as thick as a blue and white flower bowl. Wang Xianji originally thought that the girl would know the severity of the matter after 3 times. Unexpectedly, in the middle of the night, a sneak attack followed. Wang Xianji closed his eyes and rested in the wilderness. He sat and slept for a full 6 hours. It wasn't until midnight that the young girl broke out of the ground 10 feet away. Even Wang Xianji didn't know how she guessed that he would sit and rest in that place, because no matter how profound the Chimandu in Jiao was, it was impossible to make any undetectable movements under his eyes. This time, Wang Xianji, who did not care whether he was asleep or awake, still turned his head slightly hurriedly to avoid the girl assassin's hand chop. In the first fight, Wang Xianji had already confirmed that the girl's hand chop was very strange. It was a novel technique that he had never heard of before. It was clean and neat and was good at breaking gang chi. Even the body of an ordinary martial artist in the Vajra realm might not be able to withstand it. Moreover, the girl's hand chop was almost masochistic. Therefore, in the moment before the hand chop succeeded, she could burst out a unique, mysterious finger technique. It was similar to the peeling skin and tendons of the human cat Han Shangxian. Could be said that her hand chop could easily kill Jianghu masters below the first rank. However, her original intention was more abnormal. She aimed to assassinate celestial phenomenon and land immortal in the latter two realms of the first rank. Who in the world could have taught such an unreasonable killer? Therefore, in the third fight, Wang Xianji, who had been sitting cross-legged, turned his head sideways to avoid the hand chop. He also grabbed the girl's ankle and slammed her to the ground in front of him. At the same time, he asked, "What's your name?" The girl jumped out of the big hole that was created by her body. She did not make a sound and disappeared in a flash. Wang Xianji was just a little helpless. He did not get up and chase after her. He treated her more like a naughty child with a bad temper. Soon, Wang Xianji's helplessness turned into annoyance. The girl assassin did not know when to stop. Only 3 days later, Wang Xianji entered the border of River Province, which was near Bailiang Road, and launched another ingenious attack. Wang Xianji was drinking water from a deep well. The girl slid out along the wall of the well without warning and stabbed her hand chop toward Wang Xianji's neck. Annoyed that she did not know what was good for her, Wang Xianji hit her head with his elbow. She fell to the bottom of the well and fell into the water. Wang Xianji did not show too much mercy with this elbow. Even if she was a first-rank Vajra realm master, she would have to cultivate for a year and a half before she could get out of bed and walk. However, the girl assassin, who later appeared with a pale face, still diligently carried out the fifth assassination. Wang Xianji walked in the downtown area. The girl in ragged clothes rushed out from a dark and narrow alley. This time, Wang Xianji directly punched her head. The girl's head fell back and crashed into a restaurant. She broke an outer wall and a few tables. She slumped against the inner wall of the restaurant. Wang Xianji said coldly, "Next time, you will really die." The stubborn girl pressed her weak back against the wall and tiptoed on the ground. She tried to use this as a support to stand up. However, she sat down again after standing halfway. She did not know how many times she did this, but it was all in vain. Half a day later, it was the last time. Wang Xianji walked on the post-house road at the border of the two prefectures. He could already see the boundary stone that connected the two prefectures. Next to the tall boundary stone, there was a girl. She was still wearing a slanted mink hat and carrying a sunflower. She just stood there. She seemed to be foolishly trying to guard herself. The girl snorted. She did not have the strength to assassinate anyone. She had no choice but to stand in his way. Then, she raised her arm and wiped away the blood that had seeped out of her nose or mouth. She gently placed the sunflower on the boundary stone. Then, she carefully took off her mink hat and pulled out an old pearl hairpin. She placed them together with the sunflower that was far from its golden color. Chapter 1095. Numerous riders galloped out of Great Peace City. They were all the best posthuman of Liang. The posthuman they rode was actually the emperor's beloved Fergana horse. The posthuman riders galloped wildly on the imperial street. Everywhere they passed, no one dared to stop them. The leader of the courier riders carried an urgent imperial edict that was 800 li away. The imperial edict did not follow the rules of etiquette. Other than being stamped with the national seal of Emperor Liang, there were only 4 words on the golden silk: fight or retreat. When the courier riders galloped out of the city, there just happened to be a person slowly walking through the southern city gate. The Fergana horse actually passed right through this person's body. There was no scene of the person being thrown off his horse, nor was there a scene of flesh and blood. The rider continued south to deliver the urgent secret edict. The visitor from Great Peace City still entered the city unscathed. There weren't even any soldiers patrolling the city to capture this person. All of the soldiers and commoners near the southern gate ignored him. After he entered the city, He went all the way to the Shema Wei courier station and stopped under a dragon claw scholar tree. He saw 14 men with sabers walk out of this courier station that was specially provided for the soldiers of the Su family. They all mounted their horses and headed towards the imperial city. The young man under the dragon claw scholar tree followed behind like an immortal riding the wind. From beginning to end, no one looked at him. However, he recognized them, or rather, he could guess their identities. The leader of the group was an old man called Feng Ling. He came from the grasslands of Liaodong and was a fierce general under Su Zhao's command. He was 60 years old and had become a third-rank high official in the capital 2 years ago through his own military achievements. It had to be known that, at the beginning of summer last year, Su Zhao had only been a second-rank high official. The last rider was Zhu Chongfu, who came from the horse bandits of Liaoxi and was the founder of the fish drum camp. He had not recovered from his heavy injuries and was temporarily in the capital. He was unable to follow the cavalry of the Su family down south. Next was the surrendered General Zhang Dujian. In the end, he retired from the position of commander of the Lotus Seed camp. Qin Yun was an old soldier and had only been a high official, like a sergeant, in his entire life. Zhao Fengyang, a native of Jizhou, was the most senior scout in the Su family's army. Ever since he was shot in the back by a poisonous arrow, he would fall ill every time it rained. The pain seeped into his bones, so he had no choice but to retire from the army. Song Kaiwan, nicknamed Shaking Head Scholar, had studied for a few days and liked to shake his head when talking with people. He used to be the military advisor of a group of bandits in Liaoxi. However, he ran into Su Zhao, who was still a lieutenant at that time, and was wiped out. Song Kaiwan profited from his misfortune and turned from a bandit to a soldier. As he grew older, he found it harder and harder to ride a horse, so he opened a restaurant in Great Peace City. As long as one was a comrade of the Su family's cavalry, there would be enough meat, wine, and food to fill their stomachs. Thus, he had been doing business at a loss all these years, but the old scholar didn't feel any heartache. He was always nagging at his wife and children. In total, there were 14 of them. They were all old men who had luckily survived the rain of spears and arrows. They should have spent their later years in the capital. At this very moment, the two northern regimes that historians would call Northern Han and Eastern Yu had been destroyed one after another. During this period, Su Zhao first forced the death of Northern Han's great General Fan, who had the reputation of being the divine wood of the great Han. Like a hot knife through butter, he led his army to break into the imperial palace and rode his horse into the throne room. On the other side of the southern expedition, Lu Shengxiang led 1,000 cavalrymen into Luzhou on a snowy night, opening the door to Eastern Yu in one fell swoop. Gu Jiantang easily captured half of the country without shedding a drop of blood. Next to the bed of the Zhao family in Liang, there were no outsiders sleeping soundly. Afterwards, the Zhao family's son stood on the side of Su and Gu, two young and strong military officers who had rendered meritorious service. Against the objections of the masses, he insisted on a decisive battle that would decide the fate of the world with Dechu, whose soldiers and majestic armor were not inferior to Liang's. However, after the Battle of Jinghe, the battle to the death at the imperial concubine's grave, and several major battles in succession, Liang's troops, who had always held the absolute advantage in the previous battles, began to suffer setbacks one after another. Until the two armies confronted each other at the western wall, neither side dared to claim that victory was in their grasp. Moreover, Dechu had the war Saint Yi Baikue, who was known to be victorious in 100 battles, personally holding the line. The people in the Liang imperial court began to waver. Following Su Zhao's holding back for a long time, the rumors and slanders in the capital covered the sky and covered the earth. There were even several extremely important secret spy reports that were sent into the imperial palace with irrefutable evidence. The Dechu emperor's personal sealed secret letter was placed on Su Zhao's desk in the barracks. He wanted to rule the world together with Su Zhao, who had suffered grievances in the Liang imperial court. The pro-war faction in the imperial court that advocated first conquering Dechu and then conquering the world did not have many people to begin with. With the two armies facing each other at the western wall, victory and defeat were hard to predict. If they lost, they would lose the entire northern territory that they had fought so hard to conquer. Even Gu Jiantang, who the imperial court had placed high hopes on, began to choose to remain silent and slow down the speed of their advance to the south. As a result, no one in the Liang imperial court was willing to speak up for Su Xiao. All of Su Xiao's past acts of overstepping his authority were listed out. All of the civil and military officials in the imperial court urged the emperor to quickly recall the 300,000 troops that Liang had stationed at the western wall. Otherwise, if Su Xiao harbored any thoughts of rebellion, not only would he be able to fight for the world with Dechu, even Liang's assets would be overturned. The old man, Feng Ling, sat high on his horse. The imperial city gates in his field of vision grew taller and taller. His horsemanship was skillful. Although he had been living in Great Peace City for the past few years, he had never fallen behind. The old man tilted his head and fiercely spat at the imperial street. He stretched out his thumb and habitually wiped the corner of his mouth. He muttered, "You bastards are all acting like you're dying in front of the emperor. If you're not wearing mourning clothes, you're making people carry your coffins. There's even someone who pretended to ram his head into a beam in the throne room. In the end, your mother, not a single one of you died. I'll let you cowards know how the Su family's cavalry lives and how they die." The 14 riders arrived outside the imperial city gates. Feng Ling stopped his horse in the middle and the other 13 riders lined up in a line. Then, the 14 of them dismounted at the same time. They let go of the reins at the same time and touched the necks of their horses. Zhang Dujin grinned and turned to look at Song Kaiwan. Shaking head, "Scholar, we're all rough men and can't speak. You're the only one who's educated, why don't you do it?" Song Kaiwan rolled his eyes and said, "Change to someone with a louder voice." Qin Yun, who single-handedly established the first ascension camp, said softly, "Fuck his mother. I really want to have a chance to climb up the city gates with my brothers and plant our Su family's flag." Zhao Fengyang laughed and scolded, "Son of a bitch, if you do that, won't that confirm the rumors of us rebelling? Shut your crooked mouth." Feng Ling touched the hilt of the saber at his waist and said softly, "It doesn't matter how loud or loud we are. Even if those officials hear us, they'll just pretend they didn't hear us." Even if Song Kaiwan agreed with others, he would subconsciously shake his head and say with a smile, "I, old Song, only know how to come up with bad ideas. I've never been to the battlefield, let alone charge and break through the enemy lines. Why don't I, old Song, go first today?" Jiang Shang, who had always looked down on Song Kaiwan, gave him a thumbs up and said with a smile, "Scholar Song, you've been cowardly and afraid of death all your life, but this time you're a real man. I, Jiang Shang, have scolded you many times before, but today I'm convinced. I'll give you a compliment and apologize to you." Zhu Zhongfu laughed softly and said, "It's too late. Once we're underground, old Song won't have any restaurants for us to drink." The old scholar exhaled heavily and looked at his old brothers on both sides. He said in a deep voice, "Song Kaiwan will go first." At the same time, Feng Ling angrily shouted, "Draw your sabers." 14 Su family sabers, 14 lives, generously going to their deaths. The young man was like a lonely ghost that was neither in the world of the living nor the world of the dead. He could only stand quietly behind the 14 people and watch as they slit their own throats at the same time and fell backward almost at the same time. He walked to Feng Ling's side, squatted down and slowly stretched out his hand, as if he wanted to help the old man close his eyes. Dantong Pass. Inside the pass, there were restrictions and countless sentries. Outside the pass, there were nearly 1,000 elite cavalrymen patrolling the area all day long. Chapter 1096. They appeared to be a large group of nobles protecting the pass, but everyone inside and outside the pass knew. Even the young children and youths knew that they were pitiful hostages who could not be sure of their fate. Their life and death depended on whether their parents had won the trust of the old man sitting on the dragon throne of Great Peace City. Dan Tong Pass, which would not appear in history books in the future, imprisoned many of the royal relatives and nobles who would affect the structure of the dynasty in the future. There was the king of Beiliang's concubine Wu Su and the second king of Beiliang Su Fengyan, the only son of the Duke of Huainan Zhaoying, the future crown prince Zhao Zhu, the eldest son and daughter of the general Gu Jiantang, and so on. They had one thing in common, and that was that their relatives outside the pass were all staunch supporters of war. They could decide the situation of a time, a place, and even a dynasty or a country. But the most important of these people was undoubtedly the female sword immortal, the current sword crown of the Wu family, Wu Su. If it weren't for her existence, Dan Tong Pass wouldn't have needed to muster so many troops to guard it. This night, a little beggar ran through the dark alleys with familiarity. He kept close to the shadows of the walls. When he reached the outer wall of a courtyard, he gently pried open a pile of loose bricks and revealed a hole the size of a dog hole. The little beggar sneaked in and picked up 3 small stones. He bent over and snuck under a window. He threw 2 stones on the window paper. When he threw the 3rd stone, he heard a muffled sound of pain. Then a figure jumped out of the window. The little beggar said helplessly, "Little Nian, didn't we agree to open the window after 3 stones?" The companion who was hit by the stone was a child even younger than the little beggar. He had delicate features and a rare northern and southern face. He glared at the little beggar and said in a low voice, "You're so stubborn. You want to learn swordsmanship from my mother?" The little beggar smiled and then grabbed his companion's sleeve. He said anxiously, "My teacher is taking me away from here tonight. Are you coming or not? If you are, let's run together." The scholarly child shook his head and said, "My mother said, it's not that we can't leave, it's that we can't leave." The little beggar felt a headache coming on. "Why are you still speaking in riddles at this time? You're so well read. Are you going to leave or not? I begged teacher for half the night to get this chance. If we miss this chance, we may never see each other again." At this point, the little beggar's eyes turned red. The other child grinned. "I'm really not leaving. The books say that all good things must come to an end. But don't worry. The books also say that it's a small world." The little beggar scratched his head anxiously. Apparently, he was completely confused by this young man. Little Nian chuckled. "You have a teacher? Is he an old beggar?" The little beggar quickly shook his head and said, "Of course not. He was a very, very learned scholar." Little Nian smirked. "How big is very big? Are they as big as Sister Swallow's breasts on the street next door?" The little beggar said helplessly, "Little Nian, are you really not leaving? I really don't care about you anymore. If I don't go back, teacher will be worried to death." The child nodded and asked the little beggar to wait for a while. He jumped back into the house through the window and quickly jumped back out. He was very familiar with it and stuffed a bag into the little beggar's hands. He touched the little beggar's head and said like an old man, "Originally, we said that we would fight together in the future. You are strong, so you will fight in the front. I am more literate, so I will give you advice and advice. Now it seems that we can't. Take this bag of money. When you go out, a hero can't die without a single coin. Hey, aren't you always hungry for chicken legs? Remember to buy 2 when you reach a safe place. Even if I eat them, I will eat them." The little beggar carefully put away the bag and raised his arm to wipe his eyes. Just as he was about to say the secret that his father told him not to tell anyone in the pass, little Nian had already pushed him. "Hurry up and leave. What are you waiting for? After you leave, I will call mother to practice swordsmanship in the courtyard. She might be able to help you a little." The little beggar choked and sobbed. "Little Nian, you must not die. In the future, I will definitely find you. In this life, I will only recognize you as my brother." The child was a few years younger than the little beggar, but he seemed to be far more mature than the little beggar. Instead, he comforted him. "How old are you? You will be with me for the rest of your life. Go." In the history books, those who have achieved great things can even lose their father's wife and son. They are not as wishy-washy as you. The little beggar nodded heavily and turned back to leave. In the shadow of the dog hole, he waved to little Nian. Little Nian waved his hand. After the little beggar left, the child, who had been very indifferent and optimistic, squatted at the corner of the wall. He hugged his knees and secretly sniffed. Suddenly, his head was gently patted. The child was startled and quickly turned his head. In the end, he saw his mother's warm smile. He hurriedly wiped away his tears and said softly, "Mother, Don't tell father that I cried. The woman with unparalleled appearance brought her son to sit by the window. She laughed softly and said, Little Nian, you must remember that men do not cry easily. That is only because they have not been hurt. When you are really hurt, cry if you want to. Don't hold it in your heart. The child uttered an "oh." The woman smiled and said, Go! Get the sword case. The child excitedly said, Did mother agree? Okay, I will go right away. The child jumped down from the windowsill and moved the red sandalwood sword case, which was almost as tall as him. The woman came to the courtyard and looked back with a smile. She saw her son struggling to carry the sword case. She took the sword case. The child turned around and trotted to sit on the steps. He held his cheeks and stared at his mother without blinking. Father said with his own mouth that mother could beat 100 of him. The woman raised the red sandalwood sword case and pressed one hand on the top of the case. She did not immediately drive the world-famous great Liang dragon sparrow out of the sword case. Although the famous sword was hidden in the case, the sword power was already surging. A series of sharp screeches suddenly sounded in Dantong Pass. The woman stood with her hands behind her back. The sword case trembled slightly. Wisps of purple sword chi continuously seeped out of the sword case, illuminating the entire courtyard with purple chi. The great Liang dragon sparrow, which made everyone in Dantong Pass feel as if they were facing a great enemy, unexpectedly did not come out of the case for a full quarter of an hour. However, all the armored soldiers and Jianghu experts in Dantong Pass had long been in a panic. Everyone was on edge. Fortunately, for some reason, the woman's sword immortal changed her original intention of using the sword to break through the pass. This made Dantong Pass feel relieved. To be honest, they were 30% vigilant, 30% fearful, and 40% respectful of this woman who came out of Wu family's sword tomb. They really did not want to face her head-on. In the courtyard, the mother and son looked at each other and smiled knowingly. The child carried the sword case back and put it away. Then he went out of the house and sat with his mother on the steps, looking at the sky full of stars. Meanwhile, a young man who seemed close by but was actually far away was sitting not far away, accompanying them. The child put his head on his mother's knee and asked curiously, Mother, eldest sister said that after people die, they will become stars in the sky. Second sister said no. Then will they? The woman touched the child's head and smiled. I don't know. The child sighed. If only I could grow up faster. The woman shook her head and smiled. It's better if you don't grow up. The child stood up and put his hand higher than his head. He smiled. Mother, believe it or not, when I wake up tomorrow I will be this tall. The woman smiled and did not speak. The child raised his hand and jumped a few times. I will be this tall the day after tomorrow. The woman stood up and stood in front of the child. She raised her hand, which was higher than her own. Then she lowered her head and said softly, Little Nian, grow up slowly. Don't worry. Sooner or later you will be this tall. Then she raised her head, looked at that height, and smiled. Behind Little Nian, it happened to be the height that the woman gestured. Su Fengyan, who was in an out-of-body state, looked at her with tears streaming down his face. He softly called, Mother. Chapter 1097. The two armies faced off against each other at the western wall. They had just survived the damned rainy season. The muddy ground gradually hardened. An imperial edict from Tai and city was somehow made public and spread widely. It was like a thunderclap that suddenly exploded on the ground, shaking people's hearts. Su Shao from Liang had used most of the Su family's elite cavalry to win the Battle of Jinghe. He had used up all of Dechu's so-called invincible great halberd warriors. His morale was at its peak. He only needed a suitable time to make the final decision at the Western Wall. Then the imperial edict came out. All his efforts were in vain. The encirclement around Dechu had not been completely completed. Now it was even looser. The balance of power that had been exchanged with the lives of hundreds of thousands of Su family soldiers instantly became a precarious situation. The northeast defense line was still fine. After all, Gu Jiantang had already destroyed Dongyue without any effort. Most of the Gu elites were still there. Even if they did not go south to support Su Zhao's army as promised, they were still a blade hanging over Dechu's head. However, General Zhao Bodong, who had been avoiding direct battles during the expedition to the south, even though he was only responsible for the easy task of building the northwest defense line, as one of the few high-ranking officials and generals with royal family background, he abandoned the task at the crucial moment. He retreated 600 miles in one breath, as if he was determined to watch the fire burn on the other side of the river. Without a doubt, he was giving away the great victory of the Battle of Jinghe. Compared to Su Xiao, who had exhausted himself on the battlefield at the Western Wall, Zhao Bodong had come into contact with the imperial edict earlier. Therefore, when his army retreated through the night to the Lead Mountain Pass 600 miles away from the Tomb of the Concubines, anyone with a discerning eye knew that the true battle between the two countries had already surfaced. At that time, Dechu, who still had the advantage in terms of military strength, only needed to retake the Tomb of the Concubines to gain greater strategic depth. As long as Su Xiao, who was at a disadvantage in terms of military strength, dared to divide his forces to attack the Tomb of the Concubines, the war Saint Yi Baikue could be the first to blow the horn on the Western Wall. How could Yi Baikue, who had never been defeated, turn a blind eye to this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? The reason why Dechu had fallen into the current predicament was that Su Xiao had fought a series of battles that were almost desperate. His adopted son, Chu Lushan, who was not well known, had stood out in these battles. It was this fat man, who was good at killing 1,000 enemies but losing 800 of his own men, who had beaten Dechu's northern army with a kind of unreasonable and vicious method. This had helped Chen Jibao to clear out all the periphery of the northern front, and finally led to the great victory at the Jinghe River, forcing Dechu to retreat and station their troops at the Western Wall. So, they had lost the advantage in terms of manpower but lost the advantage in terms of geographical advantage. Yi Baikue, as Dechu's stabilizing force, was known as a great military strategist who could lead a country alone. At this time, he made a decision that would be debated endlessly in the history of future generations. He gave up on Chao Chongqing, who had shown stunning military talent as a fledgling, and chose his trusted General Meng Hu, who had great experience, outstanding military service, and a steady personality. He sent this person to lead an elite troop to the imperial concubine's grave. Before the Su family's army had to move out, there was a fierce dispute limited to a small area. The two strategists, Zhao Chongling and Li Yishan, finally had their first fierce disagreement. Zhao Chongling decided that since they had lost their momentum, and the Zhao Emperor had decreed to retreat without fighting, then the 300,000 troops led by the general would retreat to Liang. They could openly retreat to the imperial concubine's grave, or even to Zhao Bodong's camp and eat this troop. Then they would have Gu Jianteng listen to orders, and resolve the problem of Gu. Then they would fight to the death with Dechu and Yi Baikue. Li Shan, on the other hand, believed that this retreat would allow Great Chu, who was barely breathing, to breathe a sigh of relief. Therefore, Li Yishan suggested that they divide their forces decisively, but at the same time they could not divide too much. 20,000 was the limit. Zhao Chongling, who had always been gentle and refined, was furious. He scolded Li Yishan for being a child's play. Yi Baikue had clearly learned of the imperial edict and Zhao Bodong's retreat earlier than the general. Dechu had split 40 to 50,000 people from the already crowded west wall. It would not hurt them, but the general's 20,000 people would hurt the general's chances of victory in the battle between the two armies. It was also a muddle-headed move that was like throwing a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. It was the same as going to the imperial concubine's grave to die for nothing. In the heavy atmosphere of the tent, there was a map of Dechu's situation hanging. The red and black lines that symbolized offense and defense were circled with cinnabar and charcoal. The arrows on the table used to accurately time the marching arrows were slowly dripping. Inside the tent, there was Su Xiao, who was in his 30s and could decide the fate of the world. Zhao Chongling and Li Yishan, who had been strategizing in the tent. The three adopted sons who had been urgently summoned into the tent, Chen Jibao, Yuan Zuozong, and Chu Lushan, as well as a group of meritorious commanders of the infantry and cavalry. There was Wu Qi, a swordsman who had come with his sister from the Wu family sword tomb. He could be considered half of Chen Jibao's military master. There was also Su Pu, whose reputation in the cavalry army did not lose to the general's brother-in-law Wuxia. He was a rare scholarly general in the Su family army. There was also General Zhong Hongwu, Yan Wenwan, who had been nicknamed Camp Step by Step, as well as Lu Yuanji, Wei Taizhan, and other generals. It could be said that if the dozen people in the tent were successfully assassinated, only half of them would die, and the world would be to choose. Su Fengyan turned around and looked at these familiar and unfamiliar faces. They were the ones who had fought for Su Shao. They did not see a young person standing under the map, his finger gently moving along the red and black marching routes. At the top of Wudong's Lotus Peak, the three people entered the spring and autumn to see the spring and autumn. This person had appeared in the tragic battle of Jing River, and then followed them to the western wall. But in his eyes, the people and objects in the spring and autumn were only divided into black and white. His joy, anger, sorrow, and joy would not affect the people in the spring and autumn. At this time, Zhong Hongwu had not yet taken control of the northern Liang cavalry. Before him, there were still Wuqi and Su Pu, two great mountains. Yan Wenluan was already blind in one eye, but he was the most new face in the tent. Compared to the future Lu Qiu'er, Chu Lushan seemed to be a few dozen caddies thinner. He was full of viciousness, and did not have a flattering smile like a decade later. The famous white bear Yuan Zuozong probably did not care to take care of his beard. His beard was thick, and he seemed even more heroic. The old General Hongzhe had not died of illness outside Xiangfan City, and the great General Su Hengku had not died in western Shu. Su Fengyan looked at Zhao Chongling, who was standing next to Su Shao. He looked at the side profile of the strategist from Dechu's Guangling Green Pavilion Zhao family. He was elegant and determined. Zhao Chongling was the kind of scholar that rulers and officials would admire at first sight. When attacking Dechu, where the country was, Zhao Chongling did not show any mercy. On the contrary, the chief of the Su family's cavalry, Dechu, mostly came from his plans. Zhao Chongling was the main, and Li Yishan was the support. The two strategists complemented each other. Su Fengyan moved his gaze slightly. The humble strategist who had been willing to let Zhao Chongling cover his edge had a calm expression under Zhao Chongling's aggressive questioning. At this time, his master's expression was still very good. Chapter 1098. Li Yishan, who rarely argued with people, did not refute Zhao Chongling. He walked under the map and pointed at the concubine's grave. He looked at the people in the tent and said, "Yi Baikuei has already sent troops here. It is clear that if we were in his position, I would send two groups of soldiers, one light cavalry to deal with our reinforcements, and one slow heavy cavalry as a backup. There are countless silvers in the West Chu treasury. This is something everyone knows. Otherwise, our great general wouldn't say that after winning a battle, he would go to a mountain of gold and silver to have a good sleep." When Li Yishan said this, even Zhao Chongling's expression softened. Su Shao grinned in embarrassment. The other generals smiled knowingly. Li Yishan continued, "Great Chu has 2 gold nuggets. Those hundreds of thousands of great halberd warriors have been proven by us to be outdated and of little value. However, whether or not the 60,000 heavy cavalry under Yi Baikuei's command are a burden remains to be discussed. Raising heavy cavalry burned money. 1 normal cavalry was the price of fattening 3 or 4 elite light cavalry. The pros and cons were clear. The cons were that heavy cavalry were hard to move before the battle started. Putting on the armor was slow, and getting on the horse was slow. It could be said that other than getting on the horse to charge after everything was ready, everything else was slow. Also, turning was even slower. After successfully charging through the enemy formation, they could not stop. They had to circle around a large radius to cushion the blow before they could successfully turn and start a second charge. On a suitable battlefield, the heavy cavalry that many light cavalry generals ridiculed as one-shot deals are the kings of the battlefield. The concubine's grave, which is wide and easy to charge, is a suitable battlefield for Dechu's heavy cavalry to perform. Chongling said that if we divide our forces and go, as long as we do not have more than 50,000 people, we are going to die. Li Yishan's words were rushed. He clearly did not want to waste an inch of time, but he instinctively paused here and then said, "Of course, we are going to die. Li Yishan quickly flipped his palm and continued. As long as we can take down Chu, then we can take down Shu, Tang, and Nanzhao. That will be a small matter, as easy as turning over one's hand. We don't doubt it at all. It was precisely because our Su family's armored cavalry took the lead, charging forward battle after battle, that we were able to reach the Western Wall in one spurt of energy. But if we choose to retreat at this juncture and avoid the brunt of the attack, not only will we be able to defeat Chu, but it will also be difficult to say whether the Grand General will be able to continue to hold military power. Many of us have died, and more people will die in the future. However, at this time, 20,000 less people will die in the Imperial Concubine's tomb. All of our Su family members who died before will have died in vain. Li Yishan did not look at Zhao Chongling. He stared at Su Shao and said gravely, "Grand General, please let one person lead 20,000 light cavalry to die." Chen Jibao, who had rushed to the tent after patrolling various battlefields, said calmly, "Foster father, there is no need for 20,000 people. Give me 15,000 cavalry. But I want the strongest horses, the best spears, and the best crossbows. I will go guard the Imperial Concubine's tomb." Zhao Chongling stared with a complicated expression at this young general he thought highly of. Yuan Zuozong reached out and rubbed his beard stubble. He said with a smile, "Jibao still needs to understand the abilities and habits of the captains of the various armies in order to be able to command the last battle with ease. There are so many foreign troops and surrendered generals. We cannot delay. Let me, an idle person, go to the Imperial Concubine's tomb." Chu Lushan suddenly snickered and said, "Yuan Baixiong, are you more familiar with this kind of battle where everyone dies together? Do you not feel ashamed to fight with me?" Li Yishan said calmly, "Yi Baikue has the advantage in this battle of the Imperial Concubine's tomb. We will split into two groups and die first. The former will die slowly, the slower the better. It is best if we use up all of Chu's light cavalry. We must even let Chu's heavy cavalry make a charge. Zuozong is skilled in cavalry battles that preserve strength." Yuan Zuozong nodded. Chu Lushan glared and said, "Then the troops in the back should be mine, right?" Li Yishan shook his head and said, "If both sides are wounded, you can go. But in that case, Chu will win in the end. Yi Baikue can continuously send troops to the Imperial Concubine's tomb. That will become a war of attrition against us. Other than using up the Grand General's strength, it will also use up Great Peace City's patience. But we cannot afford to lose in any aspect." Chen Jibao said with a smile, "I will go. Give 15,000 cavalry to Zuozong. I only need 5,000 in the back. As long as Zuozong can delay until Chu's heavy cavalry enters the battlefield, I can guarantee to eat them all so that Yi Baikue will not dare to use a single soldier to touch the Imperial Concubine's tomb." Zhao Chongling said worriedly, "What if Yi Baikue suddenly starts a decisive battle now?" Commander-in-Chief Su Shao gently patted the shoulder of the strategist, who had the reputation of watertight, flawless planning, and laughed heartily. "Didn't the spy report say that the big trouble, Chao Chongqing, is still in the south? Since Yi Baikue didn't use this person, it means that he probably doesn't dare to fight too early. What's more, he has the advantage now. He is a big shot of the Great Chu. There is no need for him to gamble with us, a group of barefoot paupers." The elegant Zhao Chongling had a bitter smile on his lips. In the end, he did not persist in his opinion. It was said that before the troops and horses moved, the provisions would move first. But this time, the 20,000 light cavalry had quietly traveled a long distance. Other than carrying some provisions, they did not make any extra movements. In order to fool people, Chen Jibao even rode his horse to the front of the Western Wall battlefield. He rode alone on a white horse with a long spear. Chu's front army could clearly see this person's style. Yuan Zuozong led the 15,000 cavalry to the Imperial Concubine's tomb. Their route was north and then east. Before getting on the horse, Li Yishan walked forward. His lips trembled, but he did not speak. Yuan Zuozong suddenly folded his hands. His eyes were clear, his expression determined, and he did not speak. Su Shao walked forward and said softly, "Zuozong, foster father will not say anything good, just one sentence. Even if you die, at least leave your corpse intact. When you enter the coffin in the future, foster father can help you wear a pair of cloth shoes that I sewed myself. Yuan Zuozong heard the discouraging words but was not angry at all. He smiled and said, "No need. Leave it for Xiaoyan to wear. Just treat it as Zuozong's gift to him. I have not given him anything for so many years. I feel bad." Su Xiao waved his hand and said, "Go!" The 15,000 light cavalry quietly left the western wall in the middle of the night. Su Xiao stood in place. On his left was Zhao Chongling, and behind him was Li Yishan. He seemed to be the right hand of General Su Xiao. Chu Lushan squatted in front of his foster father and sulked. He pulled up a weed that was lucky not to be trampled by the horse hooves and chewed on it along with the mud. Su Xiao squatted down next to this foster son. He patted Chu Lushan's head and said with a smile, "As long as we can eat to chew this time, you will be the vanguard to open Shu. Foster father has already promised Zuozong. If he dies, you can count his share." The damned fatty, who was more hostile than anyone in the Su family army when it came to fighting for military merits, was not happy at all for the first time. His fat head and big ears drooped. The Su family cavalry had groups of old people and new people. But ever since they followed Su Xiao out of Liao and fought to the western wall, there was no separation of life, only separation of death. Su Fengyan squatted next to Su Xiao. He wanted to tell Chu Lushan and Su Xiao, who was not hunched yet, that Yuan Zuozong would not die, and they would not lose the battle of the western wall. But after that, when the title of king was split and the Beiliang fought Beimang, there were more separation of life and fewer deaths. Until he, Su Fengyan, carried the Su family flag and faced the million soldiers of Beimang again. Chapter 1099. The Chu Yutang that once ran like wolves and rushed like boars were now slave thieves who slaughtered dogs and donkeys. All that was left of the majestic spring and autumn period was sadness and laughter. It was rumored that Huang Longsher, the main culprit behind the sinking of the divine land, only laughed out loud after seeing the miserable scenes of the scholars running north. He made a few songs to gloat over their misfortune for the future generations to hum. He claimed that not only did the Wuling world have to thank him for reversing fate, the literary world had changed like this because the country was unlucky and the poets were lucky. When the spring and autumn period ended, the scholars ran north. There was only one record of Yong Hui crossing north in the official history of Liang. Jia Mian praised him generously with beautiful words and praised him for being able to pass through Guangling. However, in the history books of Beimang there were only 2 times. Other than the simple Yong Hui crossing north, there were more records of the second crossing north before Su Xiao became the vassal of Beiliang. This time, the scholars and celebrities of the Central Plains who were completely disappointed with the Liang imperial court began to crazily rush into Beimang, which was now the territory of the Southern Dynasty. Most of the so-called powerful families that occupied the high positions of the Southern Dynasty now fled north in panic like stray dogs. At that time, these big families spared no effort to secretly operate in Tai and City, hoping that the relatively gentle Gu Jiantang would be crowned as the king of Beiliang instead of the executioner with the surname Su. They believed that who would be crowned as the king of Beiliang would decide whether the national policy of Liang would be strict or lenient. However, the result was disappointing. The lame man wanted to be the king of Beiliang instead of an ordinary border official and personally guard the northwest gate of the empire. In this way, they hoped that before the gate was completely closed, they would be able to leave some incense for their descendants in the upcoming revenge by the Liang imperial court. Even if they had to bear the infamy of relying on the northern barbarians to prolong their feeble existence, they didn't care. For them, who were easily the 3 dukes of 4 generations, changing the surname of a country was never a disaster. Therefore, the destruction of the country was a small matter, but the destruction of the family was a big matter. The noble families lost their old roots one after another. Not to mention anything else, just the ancestral maps of their family tree that had been treasured for hundreds of years were scattered all over the ground during their escape to the north. In the spring rain, a young man squatted by the roadside. He could neither pick up nor flip open those precious diagrams, so he could only look at the page of genealogy that was spread open. The person who wrote the genealogy was obviously a calligraphy master. The handwriting was elegant and did not lose its strength. The words written on the genealogy archive were like pearls. With just a few strokes, he could write down the full picture of the achievements of a certain family ancestor. Then a tired mule carrying four gold-lacquered chests trampled over it and crushed the entire manuscript. It sank deep into the mud and the words blurred. The young man stood up. In his eyes, there was an endless stream of people, clan after clan, surname after surname, rushing together from the south to the north. He gently retracted his gaze and saw one of the chests carried by the mule fall to the ground with a loud crash after the rope broke, splashing a lot of mud. The mule driver completely ignored it and only whipped the mule. It was not because he felt sorry for the only ancient book in the chest that had been bought with a lot of money by generations of people, but because the mule's hooves were too slow. After the panicked caravan of horses and mules, the caravan behind them was much more orderly. There were no lowly animals like mules and donkeys. They were all tall horses that were very flashy but not practical in their escape to the north. The caravan was also particularly long, with no less than 400 people. The people riding on the horses, whether old or young, were not as anxious as the caravan behind them. There were even many white-clothed children whose clothes were slightly wet from the spring rain behind the curtains of some of the carriages. There were both men and women. They did not need to hold books in their hands to recite poems and chapters silently. An old man who looked like a teacher in a clan school sat among the children. He closed his eyes and concentrated. Occasionally, he would speak with the students. Su Fengyan, who was dreaming of spring and autumn, did not follow the caravan forward. He stayed where he was until he heard the words, "The woman admires chastity. The man is talented. Adhere to elegant exercises. Good nobility." And finally, the tall crown accompanies the chariot, driving away the mules and vibrating the tassels. Only then did the sound of recitation gradually dissipate in his ears. The old teacher, who had been silent all this time, only recited once during this period, and could not hide the tears in the old man's eyes. "Be righteous and retire. The bandits suffer losses," Su Fengyan thought to himself. They were not the stray dogs that were despised in the history books of later generations. They were probably the ones who were truly in the north. They should return home one day to worship their ancestors. However, that teacher would definitely not see the willows, moss, and fireflies of his hometown for the rest of his life. Suddenly, an old Confucian scholar who had no one to rely on walked out from the crowd and stared at Su Fengyan. Presumably, in the eyes of the living in the world of the living, the old Confucian scholar had long been accustomed to the old Confucian scholar's foolish behavior. Along the way to the north, there were too many old people who died of illness, anger, or drowned. The old Confucian scholar with the spring rain on his head twirled his beard and smiled. "I finally see you. You've already predicted this?" Su Fengyan opened his mouth out of habit. Although he was speechless, since this old Confucian scholar who would gift him a steamed bun in the future could see him, he should be able to see him speak. The old Confucian scholar who looked like a lunatic talking to himself nodded and smiled. "I've said it before, oh no, I'll say it to you one day in the Tuma Pass. I, Yuan Qingshan, am not considered heaven and earth in this life, but only a human. The dream that Zhao Shituan bestowed upon your younger brother, Su Longxiang, is a long night road, and that steamed bun can be considered a lantern that points the way." Yuan Qingshan smiled and said, "Two dynasties destroyed Buddhism, and only Bailiang sincerely believes in Buddhism. Since you're willing to shoulder the heavy burden, then you should receive Lu Songtao's fate, and thus build the lantern skeleton. Therefore, that bowl of blood from the dragon tree monk should also light the wick in the cage. It's a pity that I haven't seen the other two of you with my own eyes." Su Fengyan asked, "Aren't you worried that Beimang will be destroyed by Liang?" Yuan Qingshan shook his head and said indifferently, "Dynasties can rise and fall, but noble spirit must exist forever." Chapter 1100. Su Fengyan looked up at the gray sky and said softly, "This me has already seen Qi Xuanzhen slaying demons on the demon-slaying platform with his own eyes. Li Chungang entered Western Shu with a sword, his sword aura rolling along the dragon wall. The Sword Emperor of Western Shu guarded the gate for the emperor until the sword was destroyed and he died, trampled into meat paste by horse hooves. Dong Tai rode a donkey into Jianghu. Wang Mingyang, the general of Xiangfan, committed suicide after the city was breached. He died holding an old jar with the bones of his wife and children in it. He once used this jar as a cooking utensil. I've seen many people, but I've never found what I should be looking for. Yuan Qingshan talked about the mysteries of heaven but did not reveal them. 3 people at once dream of spring and autumn. Each of them has their own search. It's none other than the roots of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. The latter 2 are naturally close to you. Actually, you don't need to look for them. They've already found you. You only need the other 2 to come back to their senses. You don't have to worry too much. As for the noble spirit of Confucianism, if you deliberately look for it, you probably won't find it. Even if you look for Chao Dei, Chao Qingyi, Zhang Julu, Grand Secretary Zhang Baiyan, I fear that even if you search through the entire spring and autumn period, you will still find nothing. Su Fengyan sighed. Then how can I block the way? Yuan Qingshan closed his eyes and pinched his fingers. After opening his eyes, he said slowly, I'm not a real deity after all. I'm destined to not be able to predict what will happen after I ascend. However, at this time and place, no matter how hard I try to predict, you can't stop Wang Xianji. Su Fengyan did not show any anxiety. Yuan Qingshan stared at the image of this Su Fengyan and pinched his fingers quickly. His expression was uncertain. Strange. Strange. Why is it that the more I predict, the more you'll die? If that's the case, why will I exchange buns with you in the future? The Beimang imperial preceptor in Confucian attire fell into deep thought. After a long time, he raised his head and said, This may be one of the heavenly axioms. I can't predict some people and some things. I can't talk too much with you. I have to escort these scholars into Beimang. Su Fengyan, take care of yourself. Su Fengyan nodded. Su Fengyan stayed where he was the whole time, standing at the bottom of the caravan on the muddy road. Only then did he follow them and see them off from the border of Yuzhou to the north. Then Su Fengyan involuntarily closed his eyes. He had closed his eyes many times after entering this black and white spring and autumn. Every time he opened and closed his eyes, it was like a dream. He could never guess when and where he would appear the next time he opened his eyes, let alone who he would see. After that, he opened and closed his eyes several times. Su Fengyan saw the entire process of building the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang. He also knew why the old man with the sheepskin fur coat was suppressed here by the pavilion. It turned out that this was the ruins of Fengdu, the hometown of one of the 4 great grandmasters, the Green Robe of Fengdu. Later generations all thought that the most secretive sect at that time, Fengdu, would definitely be an underground city filled with ghastly aura. They never thought that the female grandmaster would choose a green lake and green mountain and name it Fengdu. Maybe it was just to say that a person with a dead heart lived in a place with a dead heart. Maybe there was no reason, but the woman fell in love with the green bead in the yellow sand of the desert and liked the same color as her clothes. The one-armed, swordless old man occupied the mountain by himself and repelled the new prince of Beiliang, Su Zhao's hundreds of elite riders. Later on, Su Zhao carried wine up the mountain by himself several times. They were all good wine from the central plains that was hard to buy with money in the poor land of Beiliang. He would sit by the old man's side and talk about things that he usually couldn't say out loud. There were a few times when he was completely drunk and passed out beside the old man. He was still drunk and had to be supported down the mountain by Li Yishan. Finally, one day, the old man with the sheepskin fur coat took a new pot of wine from Su Zhao's hands. For the first time, he asked the Grand King of Beiliang about this wine. Su Zhao said bluntly that this nameless, inferior wine was far inferior to the good wine of the past, but it was cheap. Not only was it enjoyable to drink, it was also very intoxicating. That was enough. The old man took a sip and said that this wine was actually called Green Ant. In the past, people urged him to drink it, but he also disliked the inferior quality of this wine. Later on, his second sister wrote a poem and the Green Ant wine became known outside of Beiliang for the first time. It was also popular in the court of Liang. This should be the origin of this wine. Later on, he closed his eyes and opened them again. During this time, he saw the two girls who came to Wutong'an on Mount Qingliang for the first time. One of them was still called Red Musk, while the other was still Blue Bird. However, she had an additional surname Wang Blue Bird. However, at that time, the two girls' temperaments were completely different. Red Musk had a strong Beimang aura and her eyes were as cold as knives. She was hostile to everyone she met, even the young master of Beiliang, His Royal Highness, Su Fengyan, was no exception. Blue Bird was the complete opposite. Her father was the youngest of the four grandmasters, the immortal of spear who died the latest. Wang Xiu had a daughter in his later years and doted on her very much. When she came to the mountain for the first time, she did not appear in the world as a maid, but as a guest. At that time, Wang Xiu's junior martial brother Lu Yanbing, who had not changed his surname, brought the girl into the palace. However, she did not meet the young Su Fengyan. Later on, Chun Jibao committed treason and murdered his own master. Lu Yanbing had once single-handedly challenged the king of Beiliang, who had 500 cavalry escorts. In the end, he was stopped by Jian Jihuang after 8 strikes. Su Xiao, who had always been very rude to the martial artists of Jianghu, allowed this martial arts genius to leave and gave him 3 chances to take revenge. After using up all 3 chances, Lu Yanbing did not manage to kill Su Xiao, nor did he manage to kill Chun Jibao, who was at the peak of his power at the border. He had become friends with Jian Jihuang, who had been a coachman for a few years. They met for a drink and Lu Yanbing found out that the old swordsman with missing front teeth, who was his natal yellow formation map, was actually the junior martial brother of the Sword Emperor of Shishu. At first, he had come to Beiliang to take revenge, but later on, after many killings, he no longer had that hatred. Lu Yanbing casually said, "The emperor and his minister died at the gates of the country, while the swordsman died in Jianghu. The Sword Emperor of Shishu, both of them died for a reason." Old Huang smiled and replied, "That's true, but I can't say such things." Old Huang also said that he quite liked the young highness and would not dislike the smell of horse urine on him. When he looked at people, he was indeed looking at people. He was not like the many aristocrats and princes he had seen in Jianghu, who only looked at people who were well-matched in terms of social status and looked at others like dogs. Of course, the most important thing was that whenever this kid went to the stables to take a horse, he would secretly bring a pot of wine for the coachman. He was very happy to see him drink. Old Huang said that this kid always talked about how fun Jianghu was. The coachman said that if there was a chance in the future, he would definitely take him to the real Jianghu. This kid would definitely be disappointed. At this point, Old Huang, who was missing front teeth, could not stop smiling. He accidentally spilled a lot of yellow wine from his mouth. Not long after, Blue Bird stopped using that surname. Lu Yanbing also changed his surname to Su and became the old Prince Liang's personal guard. For some reason, this Su Fengyan knew that this was the last time he opened his eyes and wandered around the world. He stood near the straw mat that covered the corpse of a young girl and could only watch as she was mocked and beaten. Then he saw His Royal Highness, who was his younger self. Chapter 1101. Sitting in the carriage was the most expensive courtesan in the city at the time. Just meeting her would cost 500 taels of silver. Even if he was the son of the king of Beiliang, he would still have to pay just to hear some interesting Jianghu stories from her. Although Su Fengyan had a photographic memory, his memory of the scene in front of him was still very blurry. Thus, even when he received spiced beef from the little girl many times in the future, even when he was later pursued by a young female assassin, he did not recognize that she was the child he had casually given a pearl hairpin to back then. In troubled times, human life was as cheap as grass. Every year had its ups and downs. Who would pay attention to the careless act of kindness he had done in his youth? At the time, His Royal Highness was thinking more about how to guard against assassinations outside the manor, how to practice martial arts for revenge, and how to deal with his master, Li Yishan's heavy schoolwork. There were too many things he could not handle. If it was said that many children of noble families could still have some leisure time, even if they did not know the taste of worry, they could still create new words to express their worry. But his entire youth was always a hazy and gloomy impression. He held grudges and was ignorant. He would insensibly take out his anger on Su Shao, who had the two titles of King of Bailiang and the Pillar of Bailiang. But he did not do anything and was unwilling to take revenge. Thus, at the time, Su Fengyan was very disgusted with his identity as the heir. Even Su Shao, a vassal king with 300,000 cavalry, could not take revenge. Even if he inherited the title of King of Bailiang, what could he do? The youth wanted to practice martial arts, the blade, and become a top ace. Then he would go to Great Peace City to find the emperor sitting on the dragon throne. Su Fengyan came to the head of a new grave. After the Su family retainer who had secretly escorted the little girl left, he saw an unexpected but reasonable middle-aged man. Huang Sanja, the leader of the three great devils of spring and autumn, Huang Longshi. The man who had traveled around Bailiang to plant spies had been carefully observing the young His Highness during this period of time. He appeared beside the little girl who was kneeling in front of the grave and didn't get up. He crouched down and picked up a piece of yellow soil. Very quickly, he skillfully molded a small clay figurine. He handed it to the little girl and asked, "Does it look like him?" When the little girl heard the noise, she didn't take the clay figurine. Instead, she knelt and took a few steps back, her eyes cold. He pinched the clay figurine with 2 fingers, raised his arm, and continued to ask, "Do they look alike?" The little girl, whose shoes were torn and her clothes were torn and her hands and feet were full of frostbite, was stunned for a moment. She stared at the clay figurine with her eyes wide open. She snatched it and carefully held it in her arms. Finally, she burst into tears. The middle-aged man sat on the ground and smiled softly. "The clay figurine looks like your mother, but you look like my daughter. I'm very happy to meet you. This makes me happier than any book person I've found in this spring and autumn." The little girl only cared about her heart-wrenching sobs. He didn't care. His eyes were abnormally gentle, like a father who was on the verge of despair and found his long-lost daughter in a foreign land thousands of miles away. He continued, "My name is Huang Longshi. I've monopolized the spring and autumn 3 grades here. From now on, you'll be called Jia Jia. You were born in the spring and autumn 3 grades, so you'll have the same surname as the spring and autumn 13 grades. However, you share the same name with someone who lived a long time ago." The little girl stopped crying, but she still didn't dare to approach this strange man. However, she knew that he didn't have any bad intentions, because she didn't hate him from the bottom of her heart. Huang Longshi sat in the soil in front of the grave. "I'll teach you martial arts in the future. The young man you want to repay is also a book person. However, he will die before the age of 30. The official and unofficial history records many strange ways of dying. Anyway, they're all curses. The best and worst way is that he died under the iron hooves of Beimang and died without an intact corpse. I think that if he can die by your hands in the future, it'll be a very good way to repay you." Huang Longshi looked at her young face, which didn't understand much but was full of sadness. His heart suddenly softened. He said softly, "Since the person who flipped through the book inexplicably came into the book and wasn't crushed to death by the pages, then things in the future might be different." Huang Longshi stood up and smiled as he extended his hand to her. The little girl stood up with him holding her hand. Then, she looked at the field of golden sunflowers in the distance, lost in thought. Huang Longshi turned his head and looked at the small grave made of new soil. He sighed. He didn't need to think to know that the grave would be dug up again and again by greedy people who didn't respect ghosts and gods just to take away the beaded golden hairpin. However, he didn't tell her this. The little girl suddenly ran to the field of golden sunflowers. She broke off 2 stalks and placed one in front of the grave. Then, she thought for a moment and put down the other stalk that she planned to carry on her shoulder and put it beside her feet. She knelt on the ground, facing the distance, and kowtowed 3 times. Su Fengyan, who happened to be standing where the little girl was kowtowing, gently turned his body. The 1,000-character classic of the 300,000 elementary studies opened with the grand 8 characters: Heaven and Earth black and yellow, Universe primitive and desolate. The universe was then analyzed into the 8 characters, up and down, for directions, since ancient times. The Taoist master Zhao Shituan's dream of the spring and autumn annals originated from an ancient person who had achieved the Tao in ancient times. This was the essence of the later generations' astral travel. At this moment, this Su Fengnian raised his head and looked into the distance with Huang Longshi, who was now only 40 years old. On the top of Little Lotus Peak, the new Prince Liang, who had never obstructed his physical body from walking and thinking even after 10 astral travels, now looked like a half-dead person who had fallen into a deep sleep. Wudong Song Jiming, Chen Yi, and Yu Xingrui, who were of the same generation as the sword maniac Wang Xiaoping, took turns guarding outside the pass for Su Fengnian. Chapter 1102. Handsome falcons constantly landed on the tortoise's back, delivering intelligence reports. The second report came late, because after the Peachwood sword flew up the mountain, Song Jiming, who was guarding the pass at the time, knew the outcome. Chun Yao and Yu Xingrui rushed over after hearing the news, but they were both silent. Yu Xingrui's temperament was the most natural among his fellow apprentices. Apart from his younger apprentice brother Hong Shixiang, the old man leaned against the stone tortoise's foot and raised his head, not daring to look at the hovering flying sword. Chun Yao, who was even older than the current Wudong sect leader's master, sat beside his younger apprentice brother and said softly, "This can be considered a happy funeral. Don't let younger apprentice brother Wang leave uneasy." Yu Xingrui nodded woodenly and said, "The sect leader is gone. Younger apprentice brother is gone. Younger apprentice brother Wang is gone. Elder apprentice brother Song also said he would be gone soon. It's only been a few years, but the 6 of us." Chun Yao laughed. "But they left without any regrets. Think about it, Jade Axe was brought up the mountain by you, and so many other juniors also went up the mountain. In the future, there will be new generations of people coming up the mountain. Sometimes, when I look at those young faces, even a rigid old antique like me can't help but want to laugh." Yu Xingrui sighed and said in a muffled voice, "I'm not as open-minded as you." Chun Yao joked, "Your disciple is stronger than you." Yu Xingrui said in a low voice, "If he dares not take back younger apprentice brother, he can continue to be the sect leader. I don't recognize him as my disciple anyway." Chun Yao said angrily, "Are you still being reasonable? I'm in charge of the discipline. You want to be beaten at your age?" Yu Xingrui suddenly laughed and rubbed his cheeks. He sighed and said, "When we were young, it was Uncle Peng who was in charge of the discipline on the mountain. I always liked to go against Uncle Peng. When he was angry, he always said that if he had the ability to be the sect leader, he wouldn't care about me. I never thought that Jade Axe would become the sect leader. I have no regrets now." Chun Yao said worriedly, "It's not good to stop them one by one." Yu Xingrui, who had been in Jianghu for the longest time, shook his head and said, "It can't be helped. Among the top 10 masters of the world, except for the recent kidnapping of Gao Shulu, the devil Luo Yang and the broken spear Deng Mao, when have I heard of any other two fighting side by side? Moreover, this time Dong Tai was on Wang Xianji's side. Even if Chao Chongqing wanted to interfere, De Chu had already restored his country and would not leave Guangling Road. Taking a step back, even if someone was willing to join forces with Little Ping, would our junior brother be willing? Taking a step back, if he was really willing, he probably wouldn't be able to use that final sword strike. Taking a step back, blocking Wang Xianji is not stalling for time. Wang Xianji's walking speed is not slow, but it is definitely not fast. The people blocking her are all using their own methods to find flaws. Chun Yao said helplessly, "If only junior brother were here. In this kind of battle, one person is more useful than 300,000 cavalry." Yu Xingrui thought for a moment and said, "It's better to rely on yourself than on others. Only those who cherish their own good fortune will come here." Chun Yao said no more. The two sat on the other side of the turtle hunchback and suddenly heard their senior brother Song Jiming cry out in surprise. The two old men stood up to take a look and were finally relieved. They looked at each other and smiled. One of the Su Fengnian came back to his senses, but did not return to his body. He stood near the Peachwood sword and lightly bowed to the 3 Wudong Jinren. A month later, the moon shone on the summit of Kongzhou Peak. Chun Yao waited for the return of the second Su Fengnian. In front of him, there was a nimble ball of purple-gold qi that surrounded this Su Fengyan leisurely. The Su Fengyan lay on his side at the edge of the cliff, one hand propping up his head and facing the outside of the mountain. Sleeping in the spring and autumn, sleeping in the spring and autumn, the stone root lies high and forgets the year. Not sleeping on a blanket, not covered with a blanket, heaven and earth as the bed, covered with a bright moon. Thunder rumbled and lightning flashed. Mount Tai destroyed. The ocean 10,000 feet high fell from the sky. Black dragons screamed and frightened ghosts and gods. I was sleeping so soundly. Eyes to nose to life, heart to heart. Continuous breathing, silently holding on. The void is extremely quiet. Essential Qi floating Dan pool, inside the divine water ring 5. Called Jiating. Summon the spirits. My God is out of the 9 palaces, roaming the green and blue. Watching the sea in a dream, yin and yang are mentioned in the smoke. I don't know how many years have passed outside of the spring and autumn. This person who forgot his worries. Truly, he could sit back and relax. There were already 3 Su Fengyan on the mountain, sitting, lying, or standing. Only the last one was left. In the early morning, the sitting Su Fengyan began to feel as if he was struck by lightning, as if he was trying to wake up. Chen Yao was shocked. Even if the old man did not know the mystery of the spring and autumn dream, he should know that this was not good news. Logically speaking, the latest spy report said that Wang Xianji was still in Hezhou and had not entered the Bailiang Road. Even if the Su Fengyan calculated something, at the very least, Su Yanbing could resist for a while. The new Prince Liang should not be so impatient. Could it be that he had encountered an irresistible setback in his dream? Chen Yao did not dare to speak. He could only resign himself to fate. Finally, the Su Fengyan opened his eyes. After a moment of thought, he murmured, I can't wait any longer. For the time being, the Su Fengyan only had the body of Gao Shulu and did not have the complete soul. He turned to Chen Yao and said guiltily, These years, I owe Wudong too much. Chen Yao took a deep breath and said slowly, Without Jinwu, there would be no Wudong. Then Chen Yao could not help but ask in a low voice, Why did you wake up so early? The Su Fengyan smiled and shook his head, not giving an answer. The Su Fengyan walked more than 100 feet into the cliff, turned around, and began to sprint. The other 2 Su Fengyan opened up a path to the summit. The Su Fengyan leaped out of the lotus peak. He crashed into the sea of clouds. He fell to the foot of the mountain. With a loud sound like a mountain hitting the sky, even Chen Yao, who was standing on the summit, felt the whole mountain shake. Chen Yao suddenly felt uneasy. This was a bell that sounded like a death knell. The Su Fengyan bent his knees and landed on the ground, creating a large hole at the foot of the mountain that was several people high. After jumping out of the hole, he continued to run toward the Bailiang border. In a person's life, there would always be a moment when there was no need to reason. It would give birth to a thought. Death is death.